Mr. Stroop, are you ready, sir?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I call to order the special council meeting of Tracy City Council for Wednesday, July 24th, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Do we have anything to add to the agenda? Any changes? Get a motion for the approval of the agenda, please.
Motion to approve it.
First and second. Any discussion on that? Go ahead and go to vote. Dan?
Jerry? Aye. Dave?
Yep.
Tony? Or
Unable.
that Tony?
Aye.
Who?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries to approve the agenda. All right, before we jump into this, I'd just like to say this is being televised, and, we're going to decide a very important issue this evening. So please, everyone, be respectful of each other, and if we could turn off cell phones or at least mute them in the gallery, please. Before us tonight is the procedures and hearing to consider removal of EDA board member. Would you like to start us off, Mr. Gross?
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. I submitted to the Council a legal memorandum dated July 19th, 2019 that provides for the procedures on which the hearing should be conducted tonight, specifically the order in which the proceeding will occur, and importantly, the Council's role in this hearing. As indicated, the Council is the fact finder, so it is the decision maker of what ultimately will happen tonight, and you are to weigh the evidence and make a decision based upon that evidence presented. And if there may be conflicting evidence presented, it's your role to resolve those conflicts and make a determination on what the facts are and how that construes with the allegations that have been submitted and are deciding here tonight. Most importantly is the standard of proof. The standard of proof on whether there should be a removal or not is a substantial evidence test, and there's factors provided on page 3 under the title Standard of Proof. That is what you should consider in making your decision based upon the evidence and the applicable law on whether to remove Mr. Salmon or not in his position as a board member on the Economic Development Authority of Tracy, Minnesota. After all the evidence is concluded, the council will need to close the hearing and then go into a discussion in which they can entertain any motions on voting on whether the allegations have been proven or not by a substantial evidence. So what I would advise is that the council, after the closing of the hearing, take some time to review the evidence that's been presented to them and discuss that if they feel appropriately, and entertain any motions on each of the allegations that have been contained in the written allegations against Mr. Salmon. I believe there are 10 altogether. 1B, 2BI, 2BII, 3B, 3C, 3D, 4A, 4B, 5B, 9C, and 6B. So the council will need to make a separate motion on each one of those allegations on whether there has been substantial evidence that support each and every one of those allegations. And after that, the council can make its determination on whether to remove Mr. Salmon. And as indicated in the legal memorandum, all the council needs to find for removal is substantial evidence of one of those charges. If the council finds that none of them have been substantiated, then Mr. Salmon should be reinstated in his position as EDA board member, and no further hearing should be conducted in regards to these allegations. If the council members or Honorable Mayor have any questions, I can ask those at this time prior to proceeding with the hearing.
If we find that none of the allegations are true or substantiated, we would also have to make an immediate motion to reinstate
Correct.
Mr. Solomon to the EDA board.
Correct, Honorable Mayor.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions or discussion? So at this time, we'll open the public hearing in the matter of Mr. Solomon and the removal from the EDA board.
And to place on the record, Mr. Solomon's attorney, Mr. Strupp, and I have agreed that the council can review certain exhibits in their determination. 13 of them have been previously provided to the council in the packet that was included with the allegations. There are 4 additional exhibits that Mr. Strupp has presented. I don't know where the council would like those, if they would like to review them at the end or during the process. I can present those however the council would like. But the first 13 was originally prepared and included in the packet that the council received some time ago.
Do you
I
want?
guess I would rather either have them while it's being discussed or at the end, because while people are talking, I want to be able to concentrate on what people are saying. I don't want to be trying to split between reading and listening.
Certainly. I can provide those. I'll give those to Mrs. Campbell.
Okay, so I am to understand that we would take these each in order then? Testimony about and the allegations in order? Is that correct?
They'll be through each witness, so there won't be a specific order, but the witnesses will be,
Okay,
I plan to call Mr. Ambuel and then Mr. Mattson if he's in attendance, and then Mr. Strupp can proceed with his testimony.
okay, very good.
First witness is Chris Ambuel. Have you taken oath?
Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Mr. Ambuel, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, sir.
What is your position with the city of Tracy?
City administrator.
And have you been involved in the allegations that have been a part of this removal hearing?
Correct. It was brought to my attention and I investigated the allegations and then presented them to you for determination and presentation to the council.
Can you detail the findings of your investigation to the council?
Sure. Sorry it's a little lengthy here, but on June 5th, James Mattson came to the EDA board meeting to request to buy 106 3rd Street in Tracy. He also wished to get a loan from the EDA to put a roof on that building. At that meeting, Mr. Solomon brought up the fact that Mr. Mattson, who owns a commercial roofing company, was in the process of repairing the roof in Mr. Solomon's building. After discussion and rejection of Mr. Mattson's proposal, Jeff Solomon told Jeff Carpenter, "Jeff, if you want to tell him that my comments didn't help him here, he has to talk to Robin about his wage information. You are welcome." Jeff is referring to a PACE loan application regarding the roof for his building in that statement. The following Wednesday, June 12th, during a discussion at an EDA communications to Jeff Carpenter, I warned the EDA board about serial communications and violating open meeting laws. During this conversation, Jeff Solomon agreed and laughed, stating, "Yeah." Later in that meeting, Mr. Solomon refers to the PACE loan application and his current conflict with Mr. Mattson. During this meeting, the board discussed both the potential sale and loan to Mr. Mattson. The terms of both sales were heavily debated, with most board members heavily favoring the protection of the city in the event that Mr. Mattson would default on the loan. On June 18th, board meeting, I received an emailed On June 18th, I received an emailed background report from Tony Peterson, who asked me to share it with the rest of the EDA board. I declined as page 2 warns against this practice. I substantiated a few items from this report, but was unable to verify all items. I was again urged later that afternoon by Councilmember Peterson to send the report out to the entire board. I replied to Councilmember Peterson that I did not feel comfortable emailing it since it was not a current EDA loan requirement, and I did not want to place the city in a possible discrimination situation. And the only info that I was willing to share with the board was what I could confirm outside of the report by myself. On June 19th, at an EDA board meeting, Jeff Solomon discusses multiple conversations he has had with other board members outside of EDA meetings. Mark Seeger, an EDA board member, discussed items from a report that he received from Jeff Solomon. The EDA board did not approve the sale or loan to Mr. Mattson that day. On June 20th, I forwarded an email from Mark Seeger, EDA board member, that was drafted by Jeff Solomon on June 18th, 2019. In this email, Mr. Solomon included a background check that is not currently an EDA loan requirement. Mr. Solomon refers to multiple items in this background check that he received from Councilmember Peterson. That background check contained a disclaimer that it may not be used in connection with determining prospective candidate suitability or credit and/or loans. The warning in this report goes further to declare why it is a violation of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. I also received this background check from Councilmember Peterson in a previous email. In review of the website truthfinder.com, I found a notice that you must click immediately upon entering the site and when pulling a report. This notice states that you may not use the service or information it provides to make decisions about consumer credit, employees, insurance, tenant screening, or any other purpose that requires Fair Credit Reporting Act compliance. In an email that I received from Tony Peterson, he claims to have paid for that report himself. Later that day, I spoke with the Tracy City Mayor to discuss action further, and we discussed following the attorney's recommendations. On June 23rd, James Mattson filed a complaint against Jeff Solomon and Tony Peterson regarding his treatment during the EDA board actions and an illegal background check. After gathering more information and discussion with City Attorney Matt Gross, I then called Jeff Solomon and asked him if we could discuss the allegations from James Mattson. He was unable to meet that day and stated that I might be able to meet with him on Monday, July 1st, but we'll see how that shakes out. Later the day, Mayor Dimmers called Jeff Solomon again to urge him to meet with me and the mayor. That conversation dissolved into Jeff refusing to meet with the mayor, which was later confirmed to me by an email I received from Jeff Solomon. On June 26th, I had multiple conversations via email urging me to meet with Jeff Solomon from Councilmember Tony Peterson. I stated to Councilmember Peterson that Jeff Solomon is always welcome to come in and discuss this. After gathering as much information and sharing it with the city attorney on July 3rd, I received a legal memo from Attorney Matt Gross for the possible removal of EDA board member Jeff Solomon. On July 8th, Jeff Solomon emailed multiple council members admitting to meeting with Tom Moran, Dennis Foltz, and Mark Seeger. He also admitted that he sent the background report to Mark Seeger in this email and included an unredacted copy of this same background check. I received this email from 2 council members asking me to have the city attorney look into it. Since then, I have followed the city attorney's advice.
Mr. Anvil, do you routinely attend the Economic Development Authority meetings?
Yes.
And are you aware of what the status was in relation to the proposed loan to Mr. Mattson?
Am I aware of what the status was? Mr. Mattson was requesting a loan for the building at 106 3rd Street. He wanted to purchase the building for a low dollar amount and then use EDA funds to repair the roof on the building.
So that would be a proposed sale of property and a loan to repair the building located on that property?
That is correct.
And do you know what action the EDA took on those two items?
At no time did they approve either item in multiple meetings from July 5th, July 12th, July 19th.
And is the status of that, was it currently tabled then by the EDA?
I believe in some meetings it was tabled, and I think July 19th it was, I'd have to look, I don't know the answer of what day it was declined.
Ultimately, has the EDA approved either the sale of property or the loan to Mr. Mattson at this
No,
time?
they've declined both.
I have nothing further. I would open up to the council for any questions, and Mr. Ambule.
I have nothing. Anyone? We can ask questions later, though, correct?
If there's relevant information that you believe requires questioning, yes, you can.
Okay.
You can recall any witness if you deem that.
We're not hearing from the public quite yet. We're still in the testimony phase. Or, I'm kind of iffy on how exactly when we can hear from
This is conducted by the council only.
the council only.
Correct.
Okay.
The council's.
So if you're not called as a witness, then there's no input.
Correct.
Understood.
Is Mr. Mattson here?
No.
Okay. I would defer to Mr. Strupp then.
Thank you. Mr. Amble, could you pull Exhibit 17 or have it handed to you? It would be in the packet that Mr. Gross provided.
Okay, I have it.
Oh, actually, it would be the Exhibit 17 is marked by Mr. Gross, which is a different 17 in your packet, the attachment to your memorandum. Actually, maybe.
Do you have an extra copy?
I do.
I would take it if you don't mind.
Now.
It would save some.
So Exhibit 17, which was in the Mr. Gross packet provided earlier to the council, is the complaint from Mr. Mattson. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there any other written complaint from Mr. Mattson?
No, that is. this
Please
is the
read
only-
that complaint into the record.
I, James Mattson of MSP Commercial Roofing, Unique Wraps and Advertising, Unique Auto Sales, am asking and praying to have the city file a formal complaint against Jeff Solomon of Solomon Auto Sales, located at 1260 Craig Avenue, Tracy, Minnesota, for malicious character attacks. In addition, I am asking and praying that he is removed from the EDA for the act of sabotage of my business and my character within the city of Tracy. As well, I'm asking and praying Tony Peterson to be removed for his actions towards me and my company. Signed by James Mattson, 6/23/19. Did you need this back?
Yes, okay. And there's no other complaints from Mr. Mattson?
No, no other complaints from Mr. Mattson.
Any mention in that of the Fair Credit Reporting Act?
Ask again, sorry?
Any mention in the complaint from Mr. Mattson of the Fair Credit Reporting Act? Your earlier testimony was that he is complaining about it, and I'm asking where does that appear?
That was Mr. Mattson's verbal complaint to me in my office. I fielded that on a day from Mr. Mattson. I also looked into it myself,
Looked into what yourself?
the Fair Credit Reporting Act.
So go through what you investigated based upon the complaint by Mr. Mattson.
When Mr. Mattson gave me a complaint about the, what was the word he used? Apologize. I don't have the complaint memorized. Malicious character attacks?
Yes.
You know, I had actually called him and asked him to come in. I wanted a little bit more description of what he was looking for, you know, what was the complaint, and I asked him for any information to verify his complaint. He then gave me I got a data request form from Mr. Mattson and requested a background check that was, in his words, illegally obtained from and he would like a copy of the signature from him allowing that to be obtained.
Go to Exhibit 15.
Is this yours or
Yes.
Mr. Gross's? Go ahead.
So Exhibit 15 is the Tracy Economic Development Authority form where people apply for credit. Read the last paragraph right above Mr. Matson's signature, applicant's statement.
The above information is true and correct. You are authorized to verify this information and retain the application whether or not approved. In the case of a credit application, you are also authorized to receive additional credit information and answer questions on your credit experience with applicants. Both signatures are only required if joint account or in the second person will use this account.
And that's signed by Mr. Matson and Ms. Matson?
Yeah, I apologize, I don't know her first name.
Kara?
Lisa.
Okay. So does that not give authority to run a credit background? In the case of a credit application, you're also authorized to receive additional credit information and answer questions on your credit experience with the applicants.
I don't agree with that.
So
But it's
what
not,
do you think
it's,
it's requesting or authorizing?
what do I think?
Yeah,
Um,
since you're giving legal conclusions here.
let me, I don't have an answer for you on that. I don't think it's in my determination to do that, which is why I reached out to our city attorney, Matt Gross.
Did you provide him a copy of this at the time he asked for his opinion?
We discussed it, I believe, over the phone. His concern was whether James Matson had signed it as an individual or a corporation to determine whether it was an individual.
Well, how is it signed?
As an individual.
Yes. And how was the run made? And the background report that you're questioning is a violation. How was that done?
As an individual.
So we have an application by individuals, signed by both individuals, giving authority to run a credit report, and that was done. And the violation is what?
It's not for me to determine.
Well, you did the investigation, you triggered this whole thing. I'm asking you the question.
You're incorrect in saying I triggered the thing. And I received a complaint and I deferred to Mr. Gross.
So is Mr. Gross a witness since he's making the decision on the prosecution?
No, Mr. Gross is an advisory capacity for the city of Tracy.
So then who's making the decision? You?
I presented the information to the council and the council made the decision.
How did Mr. Foltz end up signing his statement requesting an investigation?
I read through the EDA bylaws, and one of the things I discussed with Mr. Gross was whether the EDA would investigate this or such. Being the potential removal for a board member was at stake, that wasn't within the EDA board's authority. I asked Mr. Foltz what his thoughts were on it. When Mr. Foltz came in, I stated that I didn't feel that it was fair for him to have to get involved in it, or the EDA board, and asked him if he would be willing to state as such.
Who typed the letter for him to sign?
Mr. Foltz sat in front of me and wrote it out about 3 times, and it was very unlegible, and he asked me to type it for him.
Why is Mr. Foltz not here tonight? Request was made that he be present.
Would you like my opinion, or would you like me to state I don't know?
Give your opinion.
I think he was bullied
By whom?
by some people this morning, so
If you're going to allege bullying, you have to tell us who.
I think that Mr. Foltz is receiving the unfortunate backlash of this incident from certain individuals. Information was presented by Councilmember Peterson this morning at an EDA meeting asking for Mr. Foltz's resignation and filing a complaint against him for that very document that you asked earlier about, that Mr. Foltz signed.
And people are allowed to do that, aren't they?
Absolutely, and that will be investigated in the same manner.
And is that bullying, or is that simply someone filing a complaint?
I asked you if you wanted to know my opinion.
And I said I did.
Okay. So, no, that is somebody filing a complaint.
What, now, we got a whole list of things, but as I see it, it really goes down to three things. There's a claim, there's a violation of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, a violation of the open meeting law, and a general, I'll call it, that Mrs. Solomon does not like Mr. Mattson. Is that really what we're fundamentally down to in this case?
No, there's multiple charges in there. I mean, you can determine it how you see fit, but I don't think at any time it's stated in there that Mr. Solomon doesn't like James Mattson.
No, Mr. Mattson says that.
It's not in our, the city doesn't go after instances based on whether someone likes someone or not. That's not practice of, I'm sure you could find instances in other cities, but that's not a practice in the city of Tracy.
Well, that's good, because it should not be. So let's address the two fundamental issues then, the Fair Credit Reporting Act. On what basis do you claim that Mr. Solomon violated the Fair Credit Reporting Act? Specifically, what did he do that's a violation and why?
He forwarded it to an additional EDA board member to be used against Mr. Mattson for the purpose of Mr. Mattson not obtaining that building. And that report on page 2 states that it cannot be used for those purposes. Clearly states that on page 2, and I know you've read it, so.
So is that a violation of the Fair Credit Reporting Act or a violation of the terms and conditions of the report? And as I understand it, the report was forwarded with all the information, including that disclaimer, so anybody receiving the report saw that disclaimer.
Yeah, absolutely. That absolutely should be. Again, when you open that report, or I'm sorry, truthfinder.com, and you open it up, it clearly states that you cannot do that. Then the other person, this attempt to forward it to other individuals in the attempt to smear Mr. Mattson.
Now that's your opinion now, and you just said we weren't going to get into personal attacks. And now you're using the word smear and you use the word bully, which is inconsistent with that position.
Okay, go on.
So my question is, how does, well, first question, on this background report, was there anything in there, because I've only seen a redacted copy, I haven't seen the whole report. Is there anything in this report that's not public information?
I could only verify so much of it, so,
Anything not public? That's my question. Anything you're aware of that was not public in that report?
again, that's not something that I looked into.
So you don't know?
No.
Was there anything in that background report that was inaccurate in any way?
Multiple items, I called multiple places and I was unable to confirm multiple things.
Well, not being able to confirm is different than the report being inaccurate. Was there anything you verified as being inaccurate? No, I was looking for absolutes. I was looking for what did he do, because that was it was what was instructed to me by a council member that I work for, was to find out what out of this is true. And which council member instructed you on that?
Councilmember Peterson via email asked me to share the entire report with the EDA board, which I declined to do. I substantiated the information that I could in the time manner that I had. I was forwarded it about it, I have the exact here, I could tell you. I was forwarded it at 8:08 in the morning on 6/18.
So how does that report, which as far as you know is accurate, containing only public information, how does that interface with the credit application which says the EDA can run a credit background, which is normal anytime somebody's asking for money? And as I understand it, Mr. Mattson was specifically asking for a loan. I'm trying to find out what's wrong with doing a background check when somebody asks for money.
It's currently outside of the EDA loan lending principles.
And why is it? Why is it not part of the lending principles? And what legal counsel does not clean that up so it is part of the lending principles?
Agreed. I, in fact, after this process, asked the EDA board to refine their lending principles because of the fact that it was, in my opinion, some of the things different from multiple people, from loans we had just issued earlier.
The allegation of serial meetings are a violation, is that correct?
Yeah,
Of the
correct.
open meeting law.
Yep, serial meetings violate open meeting law, correct.
You are aware of the case law on that question, aren't you?
I reviewed some of it. I referred to Attorney Matt Gross on most of it.
So go to Exhibit 16. I'm going to quote the case on point that's crystal clear. We therefore hold the meeting subject to the requirements of the open meeting law are those gatherings of a quorum or more members of the governing body or a quorum of a committee, subcommittee, board, department, or commission thereof, in which members discuss, decide, receive information as a group on issues relating to the official business of the governing body. Supreme Court decision 1983, Moberg, a school case, where the school board was having a fight and school board members are meeting in various groups trying to broker a deal, but all times remained under a quorum in their various multiple meetings. And the Supreme Court said, we can't mess with that, because how else can you do public business if people can't discuss? Provided they don't have a quorum at one time, there's no violation of the open meeting law. That's the law in Minnesota. If you look at the affidavit from Mr. Mattson, which is Exhibit 14, because what allegation I saw that I thought you were going to claim violated the open meeting law was the claim there were 3 or 4 people at Solomon Motors meeting at a meeting. Dennis Foltz, Mr. Solomon, Mr. Peterson, and Mr. Mattson. Oh, Seeger. However, Mr. Seeger says, I wasn't part of it. He didn't see Mr. Peterson part of it. It was only Dennis and Jeff. And my understanding is, and the affidavit of Mr. Seeger states, that Mr. Seeger was a little upset about this allegation, and Mr. Seeger and Mr. Foltz met with you, and did Mr. Foltz at that meeting confirm that the meeting at Solomon Motors was only Mr. Foltz and Mr. Solomon?
So at an EDA meeting, Jeff Solomon talked about meeting with Denny Foltz on Monday.
Answer the question.
I
Did Mr. Foltz meet and state to you, with Mr. Seeger present, that the meeting at Solomon Motors was only Mr. Foltz and Mr. Solomon, Mr. Seeger not involved, Mr. Peterson not involved? Yes or no?
This is not a trial. We follow Robert's Rules of Order. And if you're going to,
This is a hearing. It's not a Robert's Rule of Order matter.
if I'm not going to be allowed to finish my answers, then I'm just going to decline it. Because you're trying to twist me into a situation. We all know that.
No, I'm not trying to twist you. Mr. Seeger's affidavit is clear. He says that's what was stated at the meeting.
Mr. Seeger, being on that statement, was used to confirm the fact that Jeff Solomon and Dennis Foltz were having a meeting about that, about the Asian market, which was later confirmed by Mr. Solomon to multiple board members in an email that he sent to them.
And that's not answering the question at all. The allegation...
I will answer the question if you let me give a full answer, but I don't like
Go right ahead.
the
Go right
rabbit
ahead.
hole
I
answers.
said you can express opinions, give a full answer.
All right, thank you. So on the day that Jeff Solomon talked about meeting with Dennis Foltz on Monday, I asked Mr. Foltz afterwards, because I was in the middle of checking into this and figuring out what was going on. Mr. Foltz came into my office and I said, were you out at Solomon Motors and talking to him in his office? He said, yeah, and Tony Peterson was there and so was Mark Seeger. In fact, he walked in and confirmed it too. That's the information that I shared with the attorney, Matt Gross.
And I'm not complaining about that, don't get me wrong. I understand that
Okay.
Mr. Foltz might have told you that, and I'm not criticizing you or questioning you on that.
Okay.
My question is, did Dennis then come in later with Mr. Seeger and re-explain what he was talking about? It's one thing to have people present. It's a question if they were in a meeting, 3 or 4 of them together at one time. Mr. Seeger's affidavit says no. And he's claiming Mr. Foltz told you that was correct, that the answer is no, that the meeting only occurred with Mr. Foltz and Mr. Solomon.
Mr. Coyle, Jim Coyle, Mr. Seeger, Mark Seeger, and Mr. Foltz, Dennis Foltz, came into my office. They were worried about, well, to put it bluntly, blood on the walls was in the email, and they were worried about what kind of implication they had on this, or this had on them. And they both stated their concerns to me, and they explained the story firsthand to me, what happened, which was exactly what I just told you. So if your question is, did they tell me that ahead of time? Yes. In looking through all of this, did they, that was last Wednesday at approximately 10 o'clock. They asked me to redact that portion from the packet, and I told them that I could not make any changes to the packet. That was not something that I was able to do, and that it was something, when I talked to Attorney Matt Gross, we talked about that we would address that issue today.
I'm not tracking your answer very clearly. Are you agreeing that Mr. Foltz has stated that the meeting at Solomon Motors was only 2 people, Mr. Solomon and Mr. Foltz?
Yes, I am agreeing to that.
Okay. And your claim is that's still a violation of the open meeting law on the basis?
Of serial meetings.
And-
Mr. Straub, further questioning regarding legal matters, I would just object to.
You object to your heart's content, but
Okay, just placing it on the record,
Okay.
I would advise any legal opinions not to be asked of lay witnesses. That's all I
you're
request.
certainly testifying as to legal matters. I'm just observing that. So the serial meetings that you think Mr. Solomon did, please give a little background explanation.
You're asking me legal matters, and I'll refer to our city
I'm
attorney.
asking for facts. What meetings
Again, I'm going to
happened?
refer to our attorney.
Mr. Stubb, besides the answer he's already provided, are you asking additional events or occurrences in which he believes a serial meeting occurred, as referred to in charge number 1, B, 1, 2, and 3 of the notice of written charges for removal? I would request that you address your questions in relation to 1B1, lower I, lower 2 I's, and lower 3 I's.
It's too complex a numbering system for you to grasp.
Number 1, the occurrences that are listed under count 1. Those are the allegations that have been presented. Mr. Ambule just provided an answer to you for B, double lowercase I. I would request that you proceed with the additional occurrences.
So what was the number again, Matt?
It's number 1, B, lowercase I, double lowercase I, you just asked Mr. Ambule about, and then triple lowercase I.
Well, let me summarize it more simply. Who did Mr. Solomon meet with when? And how do you know that happened?
Mr. Solomon met with Tom Moran at his residence. Again, that was verified in an email to the council, which I know you've received a copy of. And by Mr. Moran's testimony on, or his public comment on Monday night. He also admitted to that meeting that that did occur, and he did state that they talked about the Asian grocery store, as he called it, which is, as we know, 106 3rd Avenue, or 3rd Street.
And Mr. Moran stated pretty clear Monday that he made his own decisions on matters and was not swayed by anybody. Would that be correct in what he stated Monday?
Correct. In fact, he went further to say that only his wife tells him what to do. So, he met with Dennis Foltz. That again was confirmed. And he met with, or he conducted email correspondence with Mark Seeger and discussed the background check on June 18th, 2019.
So that's 3 meetings, Foltz, Moran, and Seeger,
Correct.
all separate.
Correct.
And Mr. Foltz is the one who came and saw Mr. Salmon. He's sitting at
Correct.
Salmon Motors.
Correct, I would assume, yes.
Okay. Who else did Mr. Foltz go see in this matter?
That I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
Didn't you investigate?
I haven't investigated Mr. Foltz at this point because I received that complaint at about 6:50 this morning. Up until today, I had not received a complaint on Dennis Foltz's activities.
So at this point, would it be correct that there's been no denial to Mr. Mattson? They've not denied to sell the real estate to him or denied a loan?
They have declined to sell real estate to him and vice
That's not
versa.
the motion though, is it? At the EDA level?
I'd have to go back to the recording. I don't have it memorized.
Yeah. The EDA motion is to not sell the real estate at this time to anybody, which is different than not selling it to Mr. Mattson. And is there any denial of the loan request or just no action taken at this point?
Again, I'd have to review, I don't have it all memorized in
So
front
the
of me.
Fair Credit Reporting Act requires a negative action on the basis of a report. Now, just so the council's clear, we don't think that background report is a credit report, therefore not under the act. Moreover, we believe on the application there's authority to do that and run a background report, credit report if desired because of the application. But aside from that, the next prong is, has there been any adverse decision by the EDA and Mr. Mattson's request?
Yeah, Mr. Mattson was denied his request to purchase the property at 106 3rd Street.
And he hasn't been denied to buy, it's just been no sale to nobody. And there's been no action on the loan request, has there?
Again, I don't have
Objection
it
answered,
memorized.
Yeah.
asked and answered.
Can we move on, please?
Would it be correct, it was your position, the real estate should be sold and the loan made to Mr. Mattson?
Yes, and I used dollars and cents to make that determination.
Right, you sent an email to the EDA board members lobbying for that position.
That's your words, not mine.
Even with this, I think Jamie could be our best option in the Asian grocery store, blah, 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 should be sold, loan should be made to Mr. Mattson. That's your email to the EDA board, correct?
That's correct, and you could take his name off it and put anybody's name on it because I based it on dollars and cents.
So you think anybody asking for real estate or a loan from EDA, it should be granted?
No, I don't think it should be. I think the fact that we tried to get a person into a building, it didn't work out. The EDA then decided, let's try to acquire the building. The building is dilapidated and the roof is starting to fall in and leak. By Mr. Mattson acquiring the building, or any other roofer for that matter, and doing the work themselves, the approximate was around $22,000. We since then, and I had researched it myself, we would have been somewhere around $50,000 to accomplish the same work. So you ask, was I favorable of James Mattson getting it? I was favorable of somebody sticking $22,000 in it, not $50,000, because that's good business.
Have we spent $50,000 in the building?
No, in fact, I'm afraid that we'll tear it down because it's not worth $50,000.
But we haven't tore it down yet.
It hasn't been determined by the EDA which direction it will go at this time.
I have no further questions.
Some redirect. Mr. Ambule, this credit report that you reviewed that was forwarded to you from Mr. Peterson, you answered some questions about whether there was non-public information in there. Do you remember that question?
I'm sorry, could you ask?
Do you remember that question from Mr. Strupp, that whether there was any non-public information in that credit report?
Yeah, I remember his question.
Was there telephone numbers, addresses, and names in that report?
Oh, absolutely, and it talked about everything from sex offenders that live nearby to all sorts of stuff.
So there's other information that was not of public knowledge that you could
Correct.
just access by contacting a court or calling a reputable authority to get that information.
Correct.
Now, you testified about the EDA revolving loan requirements. Has the EDA made any prior loans to other individuals other than Mr. Mattson during your time as city administrator?
Multiple.
At any point, did any member, to your knowledge, go out and order a background check for that individual?
No.
Did the EDA ever authorize that individual or anyone on the board to pursue or obtain a credit report on that individual?
No.
The credit report that you answered questions to about Mr. Strupp, did you review that? You indicated that you looked at the disclaimer and there's some notice requirements on that.
On the, are we talking about the background check or the credit app?
The background check.
Oh, the background check? Yeah, when you initially open the website, there's a disclaimer that comes up there and you have to click OK. I could read it word for word if you'd like it.
I don't need that. I believe it's exhibit number 13 is the actual background
Okay.
check, and I'll refer to as background check or credit report. Is there a disclaimer on that, right? On
Yes.
Page 2?
And page 2 is a very in-depth disclaimer. and
Does it
actually-
indicate that it's a authorized credit report or authorized by a federal consumer reporting agency?
Yes,
So it's not an accredited, prepared by a accredited consumer reporting agency?
correct.
And that's clearly stated on page 2 of that whole document.
Correct.
Now, did the EDA approve or authorize any individual member to obtain that credit or background check on Mr. Mattson?
No.
And could you verify all the information contained in that report? Was it possible for you to do so?
I didn't have that kind of time.
Now, I'll direct your attention to the notice of written charges for removal, and specifically count number 1. And I'll have you read paragraph A, which is a holding from that same case that Mr. Strupp quoted. If you could just read paragraph A of charge 1.
I apologize, Matt, but I'm going to note an objection. That's not a holding, it's dicta in the case, which means it's not a holding in the case.
Go ahead and read that, sir.
Pursuant to Moberg versus Independent School District Number 281, 336 Northwest 2nd 2D, 510, Minnesota, 1983, the Minnesota Supreme Court held that a serial or numerous meetings in groups of less than a quorum for the purpose of avoiding public hearings or fashioning an agreement of any issue may be a violation of statute depending upon facts of an individual case.
And that's the basis for count number 1 for these serial meetings. Is that correct?
Correct.
And did Mr. Solomon, as a member of the Economic Development Authority Board, sign a committee member code of conduct agreement?
Correct. It's item, or Exhibit 2.
And part of that agreement that he signed to act as his capacity as a board member, did that require him to make decisions that were best for the city and not based upon his own personal interests?
Correct.
And does it also indicate that you are to abstain from entertaining conflict of interest and voting on those items in more or less general terms?
Correct.
In the discussions that the EDA board had in regards to the Mattson loan, what information do you have that came about that Mr. Solomon had a conflict with Mr. Mattson? What relationship did he have with him?
I'm going to inject the question whether there's a conflict between Mr. Solomon and Mr. Mattson is different than whether there's a conflict of interest
I'll reframe my question.
with Mr. Solomon acting on the EDA.
I can reframe my question. Did Mr. Solomon and Mr. Mattson have any business relationship that you are aware of?
Yes.
And how did you become aware of that?
Through multiple discussions at EDA meetings, Mr. Solomon referred to it often.
And in what way?
Mostly about a PACE loan application that he was working on to try and pay Mr. Mattson.
Did Mr. Solomon hire Mr. Mattson to perform some construction work?
Yeah, a new roof on his, or, re-roofing his building, his automotive building.
And was that ongoing during the EDA discussions regarding Mr. Mattson's proposed sale and business loan?
I'm not clear on the date that it was finished, but the payment portion of it was ongoing during that.
And not to get into details of what disputes or what that involved, but was there a dispute between the two of them that you are aware of?
Yes,
Okay. And did Mr. Solomon vote to either table or decline the application or the sale of property of Mr. Mattson?
yes,
Did he declare that he had a conflict of interest in regards to Mr. Mattson?
no,
And he voted, he didn't abstain?
correct. There was no, he didn't abstain in any case.
And I believe it's your testimony that Mr. Solomon received a copy of the background report from Councilmember Peterson, is that right?
Correct,
And then he subsequently emailed that to Mark Seeger on June 18th, 2019?
correct.
And I believe that's an exhibit.
Exhibit 1.
And in that exhibit, does Mr. Solomon make any comments to look at certain portions of that background check to Mr. Seeger?
Correct. He says this is mostly BS, but look at line 117 and kind of goes on from there. Gives him some pages to refer to.
I have no further questions. I'll leave any questions to the council. Any additional questions to Mr. Ambuel?
I have some follow-up, Mr. Gross. What did the EDA board rely on in deciding not to sell the real estate at this time and in essence tabling making any loan to Mr. Mattson? Was it the report? Or was it their personal experiences with Mr. Mattson, which you just testified about?
It was, the date that they decided was based on the information brought forward by Mark Seeger that he received from Jeff Solomon.
And so Mr. Seeger is the one who provided information, not Mr. Solomon.
Correct. Mr. Seeger provided information that was provided to him by Mr. Solomon.
But Mr. Seeger did further follow-up, trying to verify information and talked about that further follow-up information he discovered at the EDA meeting, correct?
Correct. Much like myself, Mr. Seeger tried to verify what he could. And he, in his own words, I think, was up all night, is what he said, trying to verify what he could.
And he didn't think the real estate should be sold to Mr. Mattson.
At that morning, yes, that's correct. Which I'd like to point out that previous to that, he did think that he should have sold it to Mr. Mattson. And
People
those
can
are his
change their
words.
minds based upon new information, correct? And the question is what's best for the city. And so the question is, what's Mr. Mattson's character, background, financial ability, business experience, and whether it's best for the city? And is it not the EDA board who at the first blush is the one to determine that, and they made a decision?
Could you reword, or could you say that again? I'm sorry.
The question is what's in the best interest of the city?
Absolutely. It's
The
always,
EDA board made a decision that the best was to not sell the building at this time and to not yet make a decision on whether or not to make a loan to Mr. Mattson.
I would point out that breaking our rules and possibly discriminating against someone
Now-
is also not best interest for the city.
Where is discrimination at in any of the complaint that you guys have brought? We're adding now to the debate. What was discriminatory?
Pulling a
What
background
minority
check
is he
that
that
violated the
discriminated
Fair Credit
against?
Reporting Act.
That's not discrimination, that's a different question.
Okay, you can word it however you like. It was unethical, it was wrong, and it's not something that was normal practice of the EDA in the past.
How do you know that? How do you know they haven't been running background checks?
Well, if they have, I would love somebody to bring me that complaint and that information, and we'll investigate that person in the same manner.
If I understood your testimony, you're alleging a conflict of interest, and what's the conflict of interest here regarding Mr. Solomon?
Regarding Mr. Solomon and Mr. Mattson, is that what you're asking me, the conflict of interest between them? As stated, it's financial. They have a business dealing. Mr. Mattson was doing work for Mr. Solomon, and Mr. Solomon admittedly stated that he needed items from James Mattson in order to complete the PACE loan, and said the following: Jeff, if you want to tell him my comments didn't help him because he hasn't talked to Robin about the wage information, you're welcome.
And my question is, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with having personal knowledge of a person and then making a decision on the basis? The old adage in lending, character, character, character. So if you know someone's character,
That's your version of it. My version of it is that he's using his position to try and force James Mattson to work harder for him to get a PACE loan application done for him.
what's a PACE loan application? I don't.
Your
track
client
what-
knows more about it than I do, so.
Okay. I don't track that. I have no further questions.
One question, Mr. Ambul, in the EDA meetings that you attended, did Mr. Solomon speak disparagingly or say anything negative about Mr. Mattson in those meetings? And if so, what way?
In multiple occasions, he talked about his, I would say it was a character reference, talking about, I think in one instance, he said, there's not a damn thing here, he said today, that'll come to fruition. And just, there were multiple unethical conversations about James Mattson throughout the EDA meetings.
Did he bring up issues regarding his dispute with Mr. Mattson in those EDA meetings?
Multiple times.
No further questions.
What's, you're gonna have to define, this will be my last question. Explain to me what you mean by unethical. If somebody says, I've got a business dispute, if somebody says, I have questions about whether he's gonna perform, what he says he's gonna perform, what's unethical about somebody in the EDA entering in a business transaction, raising those questions? They might be right, they might be wrong. But what's unethical about bringing that up? Isn't that part of due diligence?
What's unethical about it is when somebody saw a loan that was potentially going to go through and then pulled out a background check that is not authorized by EDA procedures and tried to present that to other members.
In case of a credit application, you're also authorized to receive additional credit information. It's on the application form. You can run a credit report. You may or may not have been doing that. That's a question of why you weren't, because that's standard business practice. No further questions.
I have nothing further. Does the council have any questions for Mr. Ambul?
I just have one. When it comes to running the background checks or whatever, and I forgive me if I need to be directing this to you or to you, but is it the right of any individual EDA member to run background checks, or is it the EDA director's responsibility, or can any member just go on their own and do it?
No, it's actually, the way that it's currently set up is the person has to provide a credit report. And so that person brings in a credit report and gives it to the EDA, which is something we've discussed that is.
Has that been the standard practice here in the
Correct.
past, that they've provided their own?
Correct.
Do we do any verification that what they provide us is accurate or not?
I'd have to.
In the past.
I'd have to refer to Jeff on that. I wasn't involved in that portion of it. Have you ever had to verify anybody else's credit check?
He's not.
You don't get to comment over there.
He's not sworn in. He's not sworn in, so if Mr. Strupp would like to call Mr. Carpenter or
I'm
for
sorry.
clarification, Mr.
Oh,
Carpenter.
well, currently the process is they provide it, and that credit report, based on, and they allow it, is to send it to the EDA board members.
The one that the person provided?
The one that the person provided. And in this case, James Mattson provided one, and that was distributed to the board members, to the EDA board members.
Okay, so he did provide one himself.
Correct.
Do you know why the EDA does not pull their own report? And why is the procedure for
That
the
was a-
individual to provide their own?
That was a practice that was in place before I got here, and admittedly, it was not something that I had my finger on before this situation, and I've actually brought it to their attention. We've even talked about Jeff trying to find a certain credit reporting agency to use. In fact, it was discussed that there's 3 different ones, and which one is better, and who should we use to do this. That was brought up at a later EDA meeting.
Okay, and I'm not an expert in this, but isn't there a very specific procedure when you're looking into someone's credit history or background or gathering information? Is there, that you know of, isn't there a very specific way that you do that?
Well, the EDA loan requirement right now is that they provide I'm sorry, not a background check, a credit report, and that is where the limit is at now.
Thank you. Anyone have anything further?
Mr. Strupp, I would defer to you on presentation of witnesses at this time.
Mr. Carpenter, I guess.
Jeff, you want to stand up? Raise your right hand up. Do you swear to tell the truth, so help you God?
I love this. You blocked me back from seeing anything. Let me move this without fouling anything up so I can, oh, yeah, okay, yes. Oh, hi, Jeff. All right. Could you state your name?
Jeff Carpenter,
And what's
EDA
your-
Director.
EDA Director. So there were questions on the process. So there's a loan application signed, and the applicant provides their own credit report.
Yes.
Were there concerns that there are missing pages in the credit report provided by Mr. Mattson?
There wasn't a concern on my behalf.
Was there concern by some of the EDA members?
I think it was one of the things is, and I asked the question in a meeting, is it going to become practice that I pull it, where we pull up 2, where we ask for 2 reports as opposed to 1? It was one of my questions. We tried to get a more, streamlined, we, in one of our last meetings, we talked about, okay, what are we going to do from here on out? Boom, 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 boom. So we started talking about those things.
Talking about changing the policy.
Maybe looking at the policy that's in place, because there is an RFL, and I could get you a copy of that, and
What's an RFL?
a revolving loan fund. It's where we get the, sorry,
Was there a separate application filed by Mr. Mattson?
just one. It was changed after I was asked by the EDA member, and I think it was a couple members, wanted a couple things changed on there, so I had them change it right on that particular one,
So it's only the Exhibit 15 is the only application signed.
if that's the one. I
So the application also says, because I had forgotten that there was actually a report, says you are authorized to verify this information, which I read to give you authority to verify the credit report that Mr. Mattson provided to you. Did you do that at all?
I didn't verify it through the agency or anything like that. No, I took it from them.
Just so the record's clear, what were the motions passed by the EDA regarding, the motion passed regarding the real estate in
Be a
question?
little bit more.
Did they vote to sell it, not sell it, vote to not sell it?
There was not a motion. In fact, there was not a motion. I believe, I remember there was not a motion. to
Not a
sell
motion on the real estate?
on the real estate. And the real estate went right along with the loan, so it was, there wasn't a motion made. In fact, I think it was quiet when one of the EDA members, I don't remember who it was, I'd have to look at it or listen to it again, asked, are we going to have a motion to accept this or go through with this? And there was not a motion made.
So no motion to do the sale, no motion to deny the sale, no motion even to table the matter, just no motion.
Are you looking for my opinion?
Yeah.
I guess, well, yeah, if there's no motion, it's a no, right?
Is it no?
I took it at that because I was asked to continue to market it. So that's what I'm doing. That's my job.
How about in the loan? What was the motion or what was?
There was, and the same thing. And I believe it was brought up and I believe it was asked both for the real estate and the loan, both at separate times, and there was no motion given for either one of them. Now, I could be wrong on that, and there wasn't, obviously, because there was no, it didn't get, I don't believe it got to a vote.
What date was this EDA meeting where nothing happened?
Well, there was one,
I'm trying to figure our timeline here.
it's all in June.
Okay.
Yeah, all in June, I believe, calendar,
calendar.
is that June there?
Am I allowed to comment? I can tell you what the dates
Okay.
were. It was the 5th, the 12th, and the 19th.
Okay, there was 3 of them.
So the 19th would be the last meeting where nothing happened. I'm trying to figure out what meeting.
Yeah, I get what you're getting at, but I can't answer for sure because I don't know for sure. We had meetings, I believe it was 3 weeks in a row, and and that was a lot of that was we called a special meeting to try to get the property sold so we could get somebody in there, and that didn't happen.
And so you took it at the last meeting on the 19th is kind of where you're off trying to remarket the property.
Right. I don't believe I ever stopped marketing it, but that was where it was. I felt it was a no. In fact, it wasn't. I felt it was a no with.
So you're always trying to sell it till it's sold.
That's my job.
So you were at the meeting, why was this tabled? I mean, the question, or one of the questions is whether this did not occur because of this background report, whether this did not occur because of personal information that EDA members had. What was the concern? What was driving this no action?
I don't remember it being tabled. I remember a lot of the, because we tabled some things. We tabled something this morning at the EDA meeting, but I don't remember that particular item being tabled. There just wasn't a motion to go through with it.
And why? But what was the thought process? Why no action?
Well, because there wasn't a motion. I mean, there was a motion asked for. And I believe, in fact, I know that was from Dennis Foltz asked for, do we have a motion to approve the sale of the old Asian grocery store is what it's called, 106 3rd Street to Jamie Mattson, and there was no motion made.
We're trying to figure out motive and background for something that did not occur. Is that in essence what we're trying to talk about?
Say that again?
I think he's answered the question.
No, I'm all right. What did you?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out, I mean, the allegation is that Mr. Salmon acted improperly and that caused the failure to sell the building to Mr. Mattson or make the loan to Mr. Mattson. And what I'm hearing is there's no motion and no discussion. I'm trying to figure out how we then jump to the conclusion this is Jeff's fault and he caused something. You were at the meeting. Try to explain this to me.
Well, and I will start that by saying that I've tried to stay out of this as much as I can.
I understand that.
Because I work for the EDA, Chris, and the city council, and I enjoy all 3 of those, and I'm not going to burn any bridges. But with that particular, what I understand is if Jeff sent the background check to Mark Seeger, it upset Mark Seeger to no end, and Mark Seeger was the one in the meeting that morning that spoke up. I don't know, and I still don't know, how that vote would have went if Mark wouldn't have spoke up or got that report the night before. I don't know.
And what was Mr. Seeger's concerns after seeing the report?
Well, he had just read the report.
And what did the report indicate?
I don't know.
You never saw the report.
I did not.
And so
I asked the question, if you don't, I asked the question to the EDA board after this came up. I said, are we going to, and I bet you if we go back to the things, I'm pretty sure about this, are we going to pull up a background check on everybody that does is that a part of, because I asked for a more streamlined, what do I need to do? 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, so I can be consistent. Because I can tell you that I haven't been consistent in my 1.5 years in this new EDA career.
And so what inconsistencies have there been?
the 2 loans ago, I guess, there was no credit application even gotten. And obviously no background check. The one before that would be to a local business transfer over. I believe I got everything done. You gotta realize that an EDA loan, one of the things in there, it says is if you get a turn down letter from a bank. So you gotta you can't have great credit to get one of these.
Yeah, it gets to be a tap dance, and you can't go.
And it can be, and you can get those pretty easy, and I already realize that too.
So the discussion's underway to change the policies and get them more defined.
Streamlined, yes. Well, it just has to be, and I mentioned to the board, and I don't remember which one of those 3 dates is that I haven't been pulling up background checks for sure. Because it doesn't say in the revolving loan fund, the loan application that I'm supposed to. I'll do it, I'm told.
Do you think you're authorized by the application to do a background check?
My opinion?
Yeah?
No.
Why not?
Background check and a credit report are 2 different things.
Okay, so you think you're authorized to do a credit report?
Well, I don't know that I'm authorized to do it, but in my report, or the application process, they provide one to me. So I guess, you know what, I honestly couldn't tell you where to go out and find that one at. I guess I could go online because I'm pretty good online, so I could go and probably find it.
Has there been any discussion at the EDA level on what your application allows you as an EDA to do? The application, I would say, seems to allow you to do a credit report. It also seems to allow you to verify any information provided by the applicant, including a credit report provided by the applicant.
I guess I'm going to refer back to the point of whatever they put on there. I'm not a bank officer. And if I get a turn down from a bank on a particular loan that they couldn't get through a bank, then I'm assuming that there's some credit issues and some issues. Not maybe as far as a background check, but again, I mean, if that's put into my my rules for revolving loans, I'll do it.
Mr. Mattson reapplied?
Has he reapplied? No, he's not.
He can if he wants.
He can, yes.
He's been notified of that?
I don't believe he's been notified. In fact, I haven't notified him of that. I believe that, I will tell you that, and everybody, I'll tell you that I was the one. I feel my job is to grab these type of properties. I believe that my job is to help keep Tracy clean, help keep Tracy where we don't lose a building like that. Like, I'll totally disagree with what Chris said a little while ago and about knocking down that building. I think that's crazy. Knocking down a building, a perfectly fine building that we can fix. Sorry.
You haven't knocked it down yet, have you?
Not yet. I was in it today, though. We're not far, sir.
No further questions.
Mr. Carpenter, you found Mr. Mattson, or you located him as a potential buyer and a lender for the EDA loan?
Yeah, I would say I was a part of that. He was brought into town by another individual here in town for the Steve Trachtenberg, the dog tree company. He was brought in by that, and then he was a roofer. He was then trying to buy something here in. He seemed like he was trying to take up roots here in Tracy. So yeah, I've had him do a couple things.
Did you believe he was a good applicant for the proposed sale and loan through the EDA?
Good and only.
Okay.
And let me explain that a little bit. I was asked by the EDA, and if you go back to the recordings, I was asked by the EDA to do my own personal reference thing. So I called everyone that that was involved in, that he had done work for here in Tracy already. So I called all them and I reported that back to the EDA.
So you believed he was a good fit and applicant for the loan and proposed sale of property?
I believe that what the EDA was asking for was and what you and I worked on is, I want this to where if anything does go wrong with this applicant, just like any applicant, that we're getting our money back out of it. And my biggest thing was to save that building just up the street. And he was the only one, he was a roofer. And he, and we weren't going to give him any money until he had the roof done, and it was put right into the purchase agreement that he would not get a dime until it was inspected by the city inspector. So he was the only one. The place has been for sale for 5 years. I don't think I can make a qualification on whether he's a good applicant or a bad applicant. I'm looking for applicants, period.
Thank you. I have no questions, further questions. Any questions from the council?
You stated that you found it unusual that there was a background investigation done because it hadn't been done prior. Is that?
I will tell you that's why I didn't look at it, because it hadn't been done by anybody else. I would hate, anybody, you can pull up a background check on me, go ahead, but I would hate for somebody to pull up a background check on me that's my opinion. But now if that's something that the EDA board wants me to do, I will do it.
So that made you wonder if perhaps the policy was changing, or maybe policy needed to be changed, and that entered into a...
Not really. No,
No?
I don't, I'm going to follow what was on the revolving loan report, and it wasn't there, and so I didn't look into it.
And you said there's a difference between a background check versus a credit check. So a credit check would then speak to his creditworthiness, and that is what the EDA is interested in?
You know what? Yes, it is, but at the same time, and I brought this up to Chris and the EDA board, when somebody's getting turned down at the bank, obviously the credit's not very, not great. I've been turned down for credit before.
And so you probably wouldn't find a DUI conviction on a credit report. That would probably be something that would be born on a background report. And would that have any bearing on his creditworthiness?
That might. I mean, the fact is, just using that as an example, DWI would be time in jail and or possibility or loss of work time, and which you wouldn't pay your bills, which would hurt your credit application.
Depending on maybe when that occurred.
It depends on when it occurred.
And the applicants, you said that Mr. Mattson was the only applicant. And as far as you knew, he possessed the skills and the knowledge necessary to bring the building back up to code and be a good investment for the city.
Like I said, Mayor, I was asked to go to everybody who he had done work for here in town. I can tell you what each one of them said.
So he got a good report then. I mean,
Not all the way through. I did get a good report from Jeff.
Okay, all right.
So, I mean, and I don't, Jeff explained to me what his issues were with the whole situation and why he thinks that his job out there didn't get done. I didn't bring into Jeff on, okay, Jeff, what do you think of him? Anything like that. I just said, Jeff, what's the situation with your roof? So then I went to 5 others.
And the 5 others had no problem with Mr. Mattson and his work?
3 of the jobs were done by Mark Seeger, and Mark Seeger come back and said he had, at one time he had to have Jamie Mattson come back twice, actually, to fix a couple things. So then I went to Dale Johnson, like instructed, and he goes, yeah, when on a flat roof, that's Dale Johnson told me you're going to go back and fix things. I talked to Bill Chikuski. I can read you the text messages from Bill Chikuski on he was satisfied with his job. And
That's, yeah, that's sufficient.
I have that for you. So no, it wasn't all clean. It was, you know, you had to go back and fix a couple things for Mark Seeger, but all in all, Mark Seeger hired him again and again. And, you know, me talking to Jeff, yeah, Jeff's not hiring him again, I'm sure.
At any time, did you make your recommendation or your opinion known to the EDA board members? As
My
far
opinion of,
of that, you felt that he was, what did I write down? That you felt he was a good applicant as long as the city would be protected and he wouldn't get the money until after the work was done and inspected.
the EDA
Was that
went
shared
through
with the
the
board?
purchase agreement. We put together a kind of a makeshift purchase agreement on what we wanted in it. And in fact, Tom Moran was one of the ones that wanted the most put in there. He wanted to make, in his words, damn sure that if anything goes wrong, we get that back. So we put that into the purchase agreement that if anything goes wrong, we're the first on it. And he was gonna have, you know, some things that he put on the application as, you know, he was gonna use as collateral. Of course, we never quite got that far, you know, for anything signed. But here's the deal. I was looking we needed to put a roof on it. Dale Johnson and actually, who else was in there with me? I got a couple of estimates on what it was going to cost to gut that inside, and it was going to be about $25,000. So his thoughts, and he didn't, you know, obviously he didn't do it because nothing went through. And but he was going to put the roof on for whatever amount of money because we would loan him the money, but he wasn't going to get that until the job was done and that Shane, it was actually Shane Daniels, the building inspector here in town, until he inspected it. Then he would get the loan.
So in your opinion, the EDA board fashioned an agreement, purchase agreement or whatever that included the protections for the city, and they approved that?
No, it was never approved.
It was never
It was, I got the bullet points. We want to be able to get this back if Jamie Mattson leaves town. If he doesn't do what he's supposed to, if the roof doesn't pass inspection, the purchase doesn't go, I mean, none of this was going to go through unless he did what we said.
So in your opinion, what changed from when they directed you to write that to when all of a sudden it was just, be it, I know it wasn't tabled, but be it that was just dropped or if it was voted on? I thought when I read one of the minutes, I thought it was voted on, but I
don't
could
believe
be.
it. I don't believe it was.
I could be
don't believe it.
mistaken.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Nope, I could be mistaken.
Yeah, I don't believe it got to a vote after, and it was Mark Seeger's testimony, or testimony, whatever you want to call it, and a motion was made.
No, so, okay.
And that's when I said, okay, I'll continue to fund it.
So somewhere the ship was turned though, from developing something to protect the city to now look for somebody else to buy it.
In the back of my head, do I wish I knew what the seven
And I'm
board
not
members were
saying
going to
who.
vote on that morning?
I'm not
Yeah, in the
saying
back of
that.
my head, yes, I really am curious to see, but I have not asked them individually on what you would have voted. I got an idea on a few, but I don't know.
No, I'm not asking you for that because that would be speculation in your part. I was just asking that, in your opinion, something happened. And I'm not saying if it was Jeff or what, but something happened. It could be 4 different things that happened, but something happened that changed that ship.
Something happened to change that ship because I had all the information that I needed. I don't know that it was completely done, but I had, you know, and I have the file upstairs that it's sitting there. You know what Matt and I worked on when I asked Matt for some help with drawing up the purchase agreement.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We can,
Mr. Strupp, next witness?
Well, since nobody else is here, I'm stuck with Jeff.
That Jeff or this Jeff?
I'll let Jeff know.
I'll flip a coin with Jeff.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, so help me God?
I do.
So state your name.
I'm Jeff Salman.
You've heard the line of questioning. Why don't you explain your understanding of what happened and kind of the sequence on this EDA Mattson discussion and proposal?
Well, from start to finish, more than a few of us, I think, felt as though it was a rush to get someone, in this case, Mr. Mattson, into that building. Right or wrong, that was the case. And to the question as to some things I said, I did share my business experience with Mr. Mattson, perhaps more vivid, more accurately than I should have. However, there was nothing said that was not true regarding the way in which my job on my roof was conducted and the way or lack of way payments were handled, et cetera, et cetera.
And why don't you explain that maybe?
In other words, Mr. Mattson has not been fully paid for the job. The job was not done correctly, per the original agreement. He modified some of it in the middle of the stream. His quote-unquote professional opinion in how it should be done changed numerous times. It appeared out of convenience to his schedule in going back and forth to Minneapolis for other events. Overall, though, without getting into all the details here, the job was not done per the fashion in which he said it should be done or would be done. The other thing that occurred after the job was completed, which was, well, after the job supposedly was completed prior to Memorial Day, however, it leaked like a sieve. You can walk into my showroom and see that. There's water all over. They came back multiple times, had to take a roof drain out 4 times, and 4 different groups of what I found later to be subcontractors, not his crew, did those jobs.
Can I just interject for a moment? I can appreciate, and I think we all acknowledge
Here's my
that.
question.
that-
Have all the subcontractors been paid?
No. In fact, unless you've got another question, Anthony, I'll continue.
Can we keep it more relevant to the allegations that,
That's where I was going.
I think my name was to the allegations. I'm not the one that brought up everything that was in the EDA minutes that I said derogatorily, supposedly, or inaccurately, or unethically towards Mr. Mattson. This group up here in front of me did, and put it in a packet of allegations. So, to your question, I have the ability and right to speak to those allegations, since you brought them into the picture, not me.
No, and I'm not trying to block you from doing that. I'm just stating that the details of the issues you had with Mr. Mattson's work is not really applicable. I would like that you stick more to the facts of
But then why
what
was
we're
it brought
doing.
into the allegations, might I ask?
We've already, I think,
So you've already
acknowledged that
decided
that you've had issues with Mr. Mattson in
So
a
have you
business.
voted to leave those out of the allegations?
Here, we'll refocus. You were concerned about Mr. Mattson's ability to run his business and handling of money.
I had 2 subcontractors walk into my office from the cities. They drove out from the cities a month after the job was completed, asking me for the $7,200 that they had not been paid by Mr. Mattson. They also informed me that they were going to put a mechanics lien on my building should I choose not to pay them. Are any of you aware of what a mechanics lien is? that's a lien on the building that you can't sell the building until it's paid off. And there were some other issues, I'll try to shorten it, Mr. Mayor, that occurred in between all of this also. I'll just leave it at that. But if an individual doesn't have enough money and funds to pay a subcontractor a month after he got half the payment for the job on my building, he's obviously probably having some other payments. For what it's worth, I was aware of other people in town that were waiting for money from him. Okay, so as an EDA board member, and I think somebody brought this up, I can't remember who, it's our job to attempt, to the best of our ability, to make some decisions on who we're borrowing money to and what we're borrowing that money on. Whether the building hypothetically is worth what we're borrowing, if that's the collateral, or if the merchandise in that business is worth the collateral. That's what the EDA's job is to do. And somebody said, whether I wasn't doing, I think, what was best for the city in running a background report. Well, doesn't it make sense to know who we're dealing with? This individual wasn't a local individual who 100 of us knew, who we all knew paid their bills for the most part, who we all knew had a fairly good reputation in town. This individual flew into town in the middle of winter, approximately, to do Mr. Trachtenberg's building, roof. They had problems with that roof. I don't think that was necessarily Mr. Matson's issue, but he got in the middle of it. After that, Mark Seeger obviously had a couple roofs done. Quite frankly, I had issues, and I won't share all the details. I could see from some other information I'd been shared by Mr. Matson directly that I probably shouldn't have hired him. His brochure he presented was inaccurate information. His work comp policy was canceled just before he started my job. I, in fact, when I did make the decision to hire him, I called his work comp policy company to make sure he had it. What I found out then that I should have questioned was that he's never had an employee listed on his work comp policy. It's a as-needed work comp policy. Are any of you aware of what that is? That's when, if I decide to report that I have an employee, keep in mind what I said. If I, the business owner, decide to tell my work comp company I have an employee, I'll pay work comp rates. If I choose to pay my employee cash or whatever else, and that's his decision. But the fact is, he hasn't had any employees on it. The crew that worked on my building, the first crew, is the one I know for a fact has not been paid. The other thing that occurred amidst all of this is I started getting threatening texts from Mr. Matson. I'd be glad to play a couple of them, a couple of voicemails, if you don't believe me. Reached the point of I calling from while I was in the cities. 2 days after you called me, Mr. Ambiel, actually the night after you called me the first time, I called Sheriff Steve Telkamp regarding the text messages that I had from Mr. Matson, scoping out my father's address at the lake, et cetera, et cetera. That individual deserved to have a background check run and to know what we were dealing with. The background check was actually run only after the two individuals that were owed the $7,200 walked into my office.
We're going to refocus. Who ran the background report?
Tony Peterson
who said he was going to run it, he felt, right after those two individuals walked out of my office, and I said, Tony, I think it's a good idea. We should have done something sooner. And quite frankly, at the time that decision was made, at least to a degree in my mind, this wasn't necessarily completely about an Asian grocery store sale. It was about a whole litany of concerns. The other reason, if I can, it was shared only, I think Tony obviously shared it with Chris Amgiel. Chris said that. I shared it directly with Mark Seeger. Keep in mind, Mark Seeger had several roofs done by Mr. Mattson. Mark Seeger was calling me regularly as a friend, knowing that I had hired Jamie Mattson also. In fact, I called Mark Seeger prior to me hiring him. I was scared to death to hire him. My mistake. Concerned as to how it was. Mark was frustrated. He had leaks. Not a lot. And I said to Mark, well, you can expect a few leaks probably. Mr. Mattson got them taken care of. I am aware. Mark Seeger told me the other day that he's got some more leaks already. I don't know the shape of those again, but I shared it with Mark Seeger because Mark Seeger also had some money issues with this individual. Mark Seeger obviously chose to dig a little deeper. I never did. I pointed out, as you saw in that email to Mark Seeger, there's a lot of BS here. Look at this line, or excuse me, this page and this page. The reason I said that, for what it's worth, someone up here commented about there being lists of sex offenders nearby. And this background report tells in it 254 pages, every neighbor that you've ever lived next to within 5 miles. This background report tells you how many sex offenders are nearby. That's why you got to scroll through the whole thing. Anyway, I only pointed out several items that I felt person should be aware of. I never looked at the whole background check any more than that at that time. Mark, he's pretty diligent. He dug into it apparently that night. And I found out about that at the EDA meeting that morning. Just for what it's worth, I personally think Chris, when he sent out that email stating that I think it's he could be a good fit for the Asian grocery store still, in spite of the fact that there's an ongoing case in Wisconsin of a business theft of between $5,000 and $10,000 for Mr. Mattson. Mr. Mattson had an arrest warrant out for his arrest. He stayed out of jail, it looks like, and this is all public information, by posting a $5,000 cash bond on May 26th of this year. Approximately when Mr. Mattson was looking for money real fast, and I know this because Mark Seeger was frustrated. Mark Seeger was out of town and Mr. Mattson wanted a check on a Friday or a Saturday morning. He's also on probation.
Mr. Stroop, can we continue to address the allegations?
That's what I was doing. You brought up the issue of what I said over and over again in the last hour.
Criminal
So do you
background
not
history is
want
not
to know that stuff?
relevant.
Criminal background's not relevant to a loan? You need to tell that to the bank boards I sit on, because they do that on loans. Credit report, background check. Farm Credit does that.
Can we direct the questioning in regards to the allegations contained in the notice of written charges for removal?
So
I
let's address-
understand we have the background between Mr. Solomon and Mr. Mattson. Now can we address other matters?
So just for the record, Mr. Solomon, you did not run the background report?
No.
You did no further checking on the internet regarding Mr. Mattson?
No. Well, that's not totally true. I Googled him before I hired him. I just didn't Google well enough.
All right, but you didn't do any Googling
No.
after the report?
No.
And the only person you first provided the report to is Mr. Seeger.
Yes,
And Mr. Seeger is the one who showed up at the EDA meeting and really did not want the sale or the loan to go through to Mr. Mattson.
right. And to the effect that the statement was made earlier that not only did I provide the background report to Mark Seeger, it appeared somebody said I had a meeting with Mark Seeger to discuss this. There was never a meeting with Mark Seeger. The only thing that occurred with Mark Seeger was that email.
So there's the allegation on the violation of the open meeting law. Let's talk about the alleged meeting of 3 or 4 people, because I'm unclear, at Solomon Motors. Describe that event.
Dennis Foltz walked into my office himself. Keep in mind, as you're talking about serial meetings, the impression I got earlier was you all assumed that I had contacted all of these people to discuss keeping Mr. Mattson from having a loan. That's not accurate. Denny Foltz walked into my office, sat down, "Jeff, have you got a few minutes?" I said, "Sure." And he kind of beat around the bush for a little bit, made a comment about Mr. Mattson and my problems, et cetera, and finally said, "Jeff, I'm wondering if you're going to do anything to stop the sale of that Asian grocery store building." I said, "Denny, I'm 1 vote. I can't stop it." "Well, yeah, but I know you've expressed frustration," and again, we've already rehashed that, okay? We talked a little more, and I vented at Denny again, because I just received a text from Mr. Mattson, a little threatening. I vented about my situation with him, and that I definitely felt that he wasn't a right fit for, well, to be honest, anything in the community, was my feeling. I did say to Denny, right or wrong, and I regret this for a variety of reasons tonight, one of which is because Denny isn't here, even though he signed a letter stating he thought I should be investigated. That's correct. It's okay to have me run through the ringer, and my wife, my father, my 67 years in business, the $10,000 my father and I donated to Tracy Development Corporation 2 years ago that could have been used for a couple of my son's needs. And he's too embarrassed or what have you to come, but he wasn't too embarrassed to sign a piece of paper to say investigate me. That is crap. And he is the only one that tried to manipulate that loan. He asked me specifically in that meeting if I would vote in favor and if I would not stop that loan from going through. Because the reason he did that, and the minutes that are in the packet that I received, I don't know how many of you read the EDA minutes front cover to cover. The minutes in that meeting have been modified from the approved minutes. What I couldn't find in those minutes was where Mark Seeger stated, "We're here today because Jamie Mattson has threatened Jeff Carpenter, Denny Foltz, Jay Foltz, and the EDA board to leave town if we don't approve the sale of that building, and then he isn't going to buy anything. He isn't going to buy the nursing home, which Jay Foltz owns and Denny's a part of." That's where the conflict of interest was. And Denny wanted to see that nursing home sold. And he'd received the threat that if this Asian grocery store deal doesn't go through, the nursing home sale isn't going to go through.
Do you recall?
Go ahead. I'll just say one more thing, Jerry. No, go. I said to Denny, and I shared this at the EDA minutes, that's where some of you got the impression that I talked to everybody under the sun. And I may have phrased it poorly, I'm not sure. That meeting was a little bit contentious. Said to Denny, out of respect for you, Denny, I will make no motions to the contrary. I will make no motions to agree to sell it. I'll feel out the situation. If it looks like the majority is going along with it, I will do so. That probably wasn't what I should have said, but again, I said it out of respect for Denny. He stood up from that chair, walked to the corner of my office door, and turned around, and he says to me, you know, Jeff, there's no conflict of interest in this because I don't own the nursing home anymore. Jay does, my son. Can you imagine me trying to convince all of you up here that I don't have a conflict of interest with my father, Dean? And this, when we're in business together, you guys would all think I was full of you know what.
I was just gonna ask you when you said that minutes had been changed or whatever. Do you know what meeting that was, that was discussed?
I emailed, I believe it was, the meeting before the 19th.
For the 12th? I think
It's, shoot, I don't have it with me, I'm sorry. I've had more emails too than I can shake a stick at. But basically, the minutes that were put in your packet and my packet that was served to me by Jason Lickby eliminate the one sentence prior to Mark Seeger beginning to speak to the results of his investigation. Mark Seeger gave us a whole list, 38 items, I believe. Did he share it with you? I think 38 items. He had a printout that he had verified over 4 hours the night before our EDA meeting. DWIs, dishonored checks.
No, yeah.
Okay. So again, the missing, I felt, was pretty important to the situation at hand here. And I said to Tony last week, I said, Tony, do you remember Mark Seeger saying, I don't like threats and that Jamie Mattson threatened us? In fact, what isn't in either of the minutes is that Chris Ambule agreed he didn't like being threatened either. He concurred with Mr. Seeger. Tony, where can you find him? So he gets on his computer, and next thing you know, sitting on the counter, I'm flipping through these minutes, and I said, where'd you find this? Tony says, those are the minutes that we approved at the EDA board meeting. Those are the actual approved minutes from our packet. He went to his computer, he keeps them all in order. So somewhere between there and what ended up in my packet, that information was deleted, changed, or whatever.
All right, so we're clear. So the meeting at Solomon Motors, Dennis Foltz came to see you.
Oh, excuse me,
The
yeah.
discussions with you and Mr. Foltz. Was anybody else in discussion with you at that meeting at Solomon Motors?
2 weeks ago, I'd have said no, until Mark Seeger reminded me that he had walked in to the not my office, but into the front. He saw me and Denny. He walked over, he said, hey. I said, hey. He walked over to Tony to pay for a tire repair bill. Him and Tony talked for a bit. He left. Tony was still at the parts counter. It was 1 o'clock, I think, handling service customers. Tony never came over to talk to us. Again.
So the four of you were in the building, but on discussions regarding Mr. Mattson and EDA business, the only people discussing were Mr. Foltz and yourself.
Exactly.
And that's consistent with Mr. Seeger's affidavit, which you've seen, which is Exhibit 14. So then who else did you meet with? That was a yes, you need to say it out loud.
Yes.
Okay. So who else did you meet with, if anyone, regarding EDA business? You talked about that you did not meet with Mr. Seeger. Is there anybody else other than Mr. Foltz that you met with?
Tom Moore. And as you heard his explanation on Monday night at the council meeting what he said is what occurred. Actually, to be more straightforward perhaps, I called Tom. Tom's a good friend of mine. He's a good customer of ours. Tom's been borrowing a trailer from me because he's trying to put a deck on. I went up to his, I said, are you cleaning out the garage or getting deck material done? Do you mind if I come up? I got a couple of questions on your thoughts. Yep. Before, he said, give me an hour. I had no idea until all these allegations came out, but Tom apparently called or went up to your office, Chris, prior to meeting with me. Tom didn't tell me that day. Tom keeps things pretty close to the cuff, and what Tom says is the gospel. When I got down there, I said, Tom, I have some concerns. What's your feeling on this Asian grocery store sale to Matson? Tom laid it on the line. I think I shared with Jeff the other day, because Jeff kind of asked me, what do you think would have happened? I said, I know for a fact Tom Warren told me he'd have voted for it. If everything else could have been lined up pretty strong to where the EDA was protected and gotten the building back. I said, Tom, I don't know which way I'm leaning right now. I'm not really comfortable with the background and some other things. I left. That was as short as it was.
Did you share specifics about the background?
The background report. I think I started to share, Jerry, the two pieces that were still current. I don't think I finished. Mr. Matson's currently on probation for what looks like.
No, I'm just asking, did you
Oh,
share the
oh,
results?
with Tom
of the
Warren?
back- yeah,
No,
with
no,
Tom.
no. No, the only one that got the background report from me, quite frankly, was, again, Mark Seeger. Jesus, it was 254 pages. Did you guys all get the redacted copy that Matt Gross sent out? Kind of a lot of wasted paper, man.
Not if you didn't print it out.
It was printed out in mine.
No other meetings with anybody else?
No.
Your concerns or opposition to selling the real estate to Mr. Matson or lending him money by the EDA was based on what at the end of the day?
My experience with him, specifically in how he handled that transaction and didn't handle that transaction. At the same time, I would have gone along, had it moved that way. Probably, I think. It's a little hard to look backwards now, not because, as I think Jeff shared, there was a lot of disagreement at that EDA meeting for a variety of reasons. In other words, kind of the rush to get him in it versus the fact that another loan that was made just recently, we kind of drug out the process. There was concerns as to whether we really weren't selling the building. We were going to give it to him for $400 and then borrow him a bunch of money to put a roof on it, quite frankly, and then hope the building would get repaired fully afterwards, and that would be the collateral. We can argue a million ways whether that was smart or not, but anyway, if some others felt that that was the best thing for the city, I very well may have gone along with it that day. But I had reservations based on my business dealings with him. And to repeat myself, as an EDA board member, that's our job, to know who we're dealing with. I think, how shall I say this? Well, for the reason I probably got in trouble here, I'll say it again bluntly. Someone else at that EDA board meeting said we did not need another Darren Horner in Tracy. And I felt strongly that that was the direction we were heading. It took us a year and a half, I think, of fighting to get that building taken care of.
I'll be honest, I don't want to hear any more about Darren Horner. He's not the one here. I don't want to
No.
be dragging anyone else.
But at least you can develop a picture.
Yes.
That was my point. And that was the point of the other individual at an EDA meeting that stated that.
I understand, but here, we don't
Yeah.
need to be bringing other people's
Yep.
names into.
One question. Do you think knowing individuals you're doing business with and taking into account personal knowledge of individuals constitutes a conflict of interest in doing business?
Absolutely not. That's why banks have bank boards made up of individuals generally from the business or farming community that they can sit down and get input from. My father-in-law, Chris's dad, was on the Midwest Bank Board for 30 years. That's what they did. You know, they would ask, what about this person? What about that person? Have you had dealings with them? Do you think they're a good possibility? You know, they didn't talk about who it was when they went out, but that's what, I don't want to sound like I'm elevating EDA board members to banker level, but we are put in the position of making some decisions, and those decisions need to be based on business knowledge. We can't put the blinders on. Otherwise, write a check to everybody and cross your fingers.
Nothing further?
I'll try to be brief, Mr. Solomon. You had this underlying dispute with Mr. Mattson and your own thoughts and feelings on that, and you discussed that with Mr. Seeger. Is that correct?
No, Mark and I really never discussed. Mark and I, repeat what I said earlier, we had a relationship ourselves outside of the EDA. Just because we were both on the EDA board, you can construe it either way. But Mark Seeger and I, months and months before any of this came to the EDA board, had, well, Mark Seeger called me the one day asking me if I had hired Mr. Mattson yet, and expressed his frustrations because Mr. Mattson was demanding payment on a Saturday when Mark Seeger was out of town and had nobody to write a check. Mark Seeger he got it handled for him.
So you both had some knowledge about Mr. Mattson at that point, correct?
Yeah, small town America.
So then why did you forward the background check, despite that knowledge you had about Mr. Mattson, to Mr. Seeger if he already...
For the same
knew about it?
reason, quite honestly, for the same reason. In other words, it didn't totally, you know, you get things like that. You're visiting with a friend about this situation for months, and you look at it when you get it. Tony ran it, I looked at it, and you say, holy smokes, there's a little more to this picture than we really thought. This kind of explains who this individual is. Even though I'd had business dealings with him and it had probably determined some of that already. I shared it with Mark, but we didn't discuss it. That was shared, I believe, the day before the EDA meeting, I think, and I think, like we've already discussed, Mark Seeger dug into it. I didn't ask him to.
You acknowledge that this background report has a disclaimer that says you can't use it to make any credit decisions or loan decisions, correct? Did you look at that?
I didn't look at it, no.
But
No.
you acknowledge that it's in that packet, in that document.
I saw it later when somebody brought it up to me, Yeah, because I went back and looked at it. But no, at the time I had, no.
So you didn't look into whether it was accurate and accredited by a credit reporting agency?
It wasn't a credit report. I didn't run a credit report.
The document itself, the background check, did you confirm whether it was performed by an accredited reporting agency?
I didn't look, no.
Now, this relationship with Mr. Mattson, or this dispute that you had with Mr. Mattson, you're saying that that did not affect your ability to have an independent of judgment to make a decision regarding any business deal with him as an EDA member?
I just shared briefly a few moments ago that any knowledge that we as an EDA board member have about an individual or the way he conducts himself or behaves could be pertinent to a decision on borrowing them money.
But given your prior knowledge with Mr. Mattson, are you saying that didn't affect your decision at all on whether to enter into a purchase agreement or discuss a potential deal with him?
No, because we never entered into one. There was never a vote to enter into one. And I never made a motion to or to not.
Were you in the discussions about a potential purchase agreement with Mr. Mattson?
Actually, for the most part, if I recall, Chris and Jeff and Denny Foltz were the ones that negotiated all of that stuff with Mr. Mattson, I believe.
Was that
Now,
ever,
sure, they presented, I think, but I can't recall how much detail was in that. I don't think it totally got down to the nuts and bolts of an agreement. I could be wrong there, but I don't recall specifically.
but a potential deal was discussed at an EDA board meeting?
Excuse me?
A potential deal with Mr. Madison was discussed at an EDA board meeting where you were.
Oh, yeah, we've already proven that. Yeah.
And this background report contained information that you probably wouldn't have been able to obtain on your own, correct?
Oh, yeah, you could Google, yeah. Yeah, you can Google, I just quoted a couple of them. Just Google it, it'll pop up.
Did you confirm whether any of the information that you reviewed in that background check was accurate?
Did I? I already stated. I looked at the background report. I saw a litany of dishonored checks, bankruptcy December 2017, only a year and a half ago. Open this. I didn't dig into it any deeper than that. Keep in mind, I already had business dealings with him and had knowledge of his. I suppose the thing I could say is this just told me I should have looked a little closer earlier. For my benefit, personally.
Any questions by the council?
When was the background investigation done?
You mean the background report ran?
Yes.
I believe it was Tuesday the 18th, or, no, actually, I believe it was, no, it would have been Monday night. Just a second.
Can I add to this? The background, the front page of it says it was created by Tony Peterson on 6/17/2019.
Yeah, okay.
Just in the interest
Yeah,
of.
no, that's okay. That's what I thought.
Did you direct Mr. Peterson to pull the background, or did he
No,
do that of his
we
own
already said
volition?
that. No. I had two subcontractors walk into my office the afternoon of the 17th, late in the afternoon, basically demanding payment from me for what Mr. Mattson was liable for. Blew my mind, because quite frankly, I had been led to believe that those people, 6 individuals, were his crew. I had never been led to believe anybody was a subcontractor. So there's a whole bunch of questions that go through your mind, my mind at that moment. Like, what the heck are we dealing with here?
But you did
So,
not direct Mr. Peterson to,
Did I force him to? No.
not force, but
Oh.
ask.
Request? No,
Yes.
I just agreed. I agreed. I'm not gonna, no benefit in lying. I thought it sounded like a good idea.
So, do you know of any background checks done on any other applicants for loans to the E EDA?
I don't know of whether, if, and, or but.
So based on your personal feelings, you thought, and may have suggested to Mr. Peterson that
No, it
it
had
would be
nothing to do with
appropriate.
feelings. It had nothing to do with feelings.
I believe you just, in your testimony, said that your personal feelings played a part in this whole thing because of your prior business dealings with him, with Mr.
My
Mattson.
dealings with him, yes.
So I guess the question, and I'll rephrase, it doesn't seem like it's normal procedure to do a background
There hasn't been
investigation.
any normal procedure, and I think Jeff quite honestly shared that. There hasn't been any normal procedure with a lot of loans. In part because, this is my opinion, or feelings, in part because we're in a small community. Frequently, we know who's borrowing those dollars. Frequently, there's enough of us around the table that have some inkling as to who they are, whether they're a good person or bad person or what have you. And I think Jeff mentioned earlier the discussion later about credit reports and that we perhaps need to seal down a more efficient, accurate, and consistent method of doing this. And that wasn't there.
One of the things that Mr. Mattson had said verbally, and I don't believe it's documented anywhere, is that he felt he was discriminated against because he was new in town, and that he didn't get the same shake that a resident would get. Would you agree with that?
Not at all. That was irrelevant. That has nothing to do with this.
Well, didn't you say, well, he just flew into town
Well, he
one
did.
winter and, so
He did.
imply that nobody knows him in a small town, so,
What are you getting at?
well, I'm trying to establish if he got the same treatment
I just
as a
answered that
longtime
question.
resident would have.
Yes.
Okay,
If a longtime resident of Tracy, Minnesota had behaved in doing a roofing job on my building the way he had, and if my experience with him, that long-term resident, was the same as my experience was of Mr. Mattson, I'd have probably perhaps done some things a little differently. I'd have probably picked up the phone and called Dwayne DeSmith. Have you ever had any problems with George or Ken Schiller? Hey, I'm trying to figure out why this guy's doing this way. Is this consistent with the way he's behaved with you? We couldn't do that with this short-term person into town. So it was fairly, yeah, you can twist that any way you want. He's, Mr. Mattson here? No. Okay, does that answer any questions? Let's call a spade a spade. The individual that started this witch hunt along with Mr. Ambule and Mr. Fultz taking and running with it, was Mr. Mattson. And he's not here. Personally, to say I'm offended that we're still sitting here at this time of night should be embarrassing to all of you. This thing should have been dropped immediately when Denny Foltz and Mr. Mattson, the two individuals that signed papers to start this, aren't here. You, Mr. Mayor, should have stopped it right here, but you didn't. And now you're questioning a 67. My father and I own the longest operating third-generation business in the community of Tracy, Minnesota. And here I sit being asked the damnedest dumb questions that started because of a guy that came into town and feels that he didn't get treated very well. Well, gee whiz, none of us knew who he was. I wished I'd have done a background check before I hired him, because right now, after Bicey Roofing looked at my roof last week, I will probably have to redo half of it at the bare minimum. I won't get into all the details about what I learned, okay? I shouldn't be put through this. Mr. Mattson should be put through this. He was not treated, to answer your question, Anthony, any different than anybody else, except that nobody really knew him. And I had a relationship that went south with him. Anybody want to listen to a voicemail that I received from him, just to tell you what kind of individual we're dealing with?
I'll be honest, Jeff. I really don't, because
Okay.
we're here right now to decide on the facts.
That is a fact. That is a
That
fact.
doesn't enter into if
Okay.
you went against the Fair Credit Act, or if you
That's-
violated. It might get into his character in that, but right
Yep.
now, that is
Okay,
not
well,
what I'm here to judge, is his character.
That's fine. That's fine. Mr. Dimmers brought it up.
No, I'm
Yeah,
just,
that's fine. I'd rather not share it anyway.
So, and just to be clear, you received this information from Mr. Peterson, and then you shared it with others.
No, to be clear, I did not share it with others. I shared it with Mark Seeger.
You didn't email it out to anybody else?
We already talked about that. No, I did not.
But you also did not verify that that information was accurate and correct?
I have a response, Mr. Solomon.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you respond to that orally?
Ask the question again.
You did not verify that that information was accurate and correct?
No. But then again, I didn't totally use it for making a loan to Mr. Mattson, because there was never a vote to make a loan or to sell a building.
I don't have any further questions. Does anybody else?
Mr. Solomon, I believe what the Honorable Mayor was requesting is, did you in fact email that background report to the council members, except for the mayor, at a later
Mr.
date?
Gross, I've answered this question 3 times. I sent a background report to Mark Seeger. My apologies for stressing, but I've been asked it a few too many times. Anybody else that received it had to have received it from Mr. Ambuel,
You
because he
didn't,
was the only one that was shared with by Tony.
you didn't send it to Mr. Kutau or Jerry Shones?
The background report? No.
Okay.
No,
And that, not on July 18th by email?
no.
Okay.
Background report isn't in there.
Can I approach him? Okay, so this is an email that was
Yep, I sent that.
addressed from you.
Yep, I sent it.
Kuthau.
There's no
and
background report on it.
Subject includes background, a PDF, and that did in fact include the background report.
No, that subject is from Chris Ambuel. No, Chris Ambuel.
Do you want me to put it on the screen?
Am I right there, Matt? Chris Ambuel from,
Correct, that's a
Sent
forward,
to-
that's a forwarded, yes.
forwarded, Solomon.
Okay. Well,
Oh,
I'm not.
no. Yeah, okay. To be specific,
So we're looking, really, what we need to look at is the email from Jeff dated Monday, July 15, 11:19 PM. And he's got a long email. You saying, Matt, that it was attached to the email to the council person?
Yes, and that was an email addressed to each council member except for the mayor.
Doesn't show that, does it?
no, the complete background report was not sent. There was a portion of it that
Okay,
was
a
sent.
portion of it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, and this occurred after, keep in mind, after I had already been brought up with charges, after it was moving forward, after I was, if you read it,
And
but yes,
And
at
you
that
had-
time I did, but that isn't the complete background
Okay.
report, no.
But you-
It was just a couple of cases that were public information that
Sure.
you could find on Google.
Yeah, so let's pin that down, because this is, you've alleged the whole report was sent, and that's turned out to be incorrect. So let's pin down what was sent to the council. Do we know exactly what was sent for the council, so the record's clear?
Do you want me to answer that, Mr. Gross? 92 pages was sent to the council.
Which 92 pages?
It's just labeled as 1 to 92, so I couldn't tell you what was, without comparing them side by side, which one it was. But it talks about criminal records.
Anything in the 92 pages that's not public information?
It'll take me a minute here, please. NSF checks, dishonored checks, subsequent violations for domestic assault, dog licenser, dishonored check. Should I keep going here, Mr. Gross, or have you made your point?
yes, the point was, did you forward that to the council members except for the mayor?
I don't see 92 pages got sent. Are we sure about that?
Let me ask a simple question. Does it matter what was sent after I was already attempted to be convicted in front of the city council and they voted to move this to a hearing?
The purpose of my question, Mr. Sullivan, and I apologize for interrupting you, was did you email and include some comments to the council members in that
Yeah.
email? Okay,
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I was attempting, quite frankly, to stop this railroad and to share with them some information that I felt hadn't been shared with them by Mr. Ambuel or Mr. Foltz prior to them making a decision to move ahead with some things.
And do you think it's inappropriate for a citizen to communicate with council members and the mayor?
nope, that's not the purpose of my question.
No. Okay, so what's the point of the question?
That, in that he emailed the council members, and in that email, which the council members are aware of and reviewed, there's statements in there made by Mr. Solomon. That was the only purpose. They received that and reviewed that.
Yeah, they received comments from Mr. Solomon.
Correct.
Perfectly appropriate and allowed.
There was no allegation of anything improper, just that
Good.
in that email, that his comments. I have nothing further for Mr. Solomon.
Anyone else?
Oh, sorry. Sorry,
Oh,
Mr. Mayor.
Anyone else have any questions for Mr. Solomon? Okay.
The only cleanup question I had, because I think we have a little confusion. So what action is the EDA taking regarding Mr. Mattson's request to purchase real estate, and then separately his request for a loan?
we, at the EDA meeting, have done nothing with his request. We have not turned it down. We have not agreed to it. Either the request for the purchase of the building or the loan. We just chose not to do anything. I believe if we look at the EDA minutes, the vote was to do nothing on that building at that time. Requested Jeff to get bids for roof repairs and to get a condition report complete of the building to see where we go from there. There was also discussion, and I was quite frankly agreeable to it at that same meeting, as to if the EDA fixed it up, that we might lease it to Mr. Mattson for a period of time if he wanted to use it for a screen print business or some of those things. There were several individuals tossing out ideas. But the bottom line is, we decided we weren't going to do anything at that time. We were going to see what it was going to cost to repair it fully. And I think that's what Jeff has been doing, or did somewhat.
Anything further, Mr. Stroop?
No.
Okay. I just have a clarifying question. Mr. Ambio, there was some discussion about modified meeting minutes. Can you address that?
Yeah, the minutes that were in there were, as you can see, they're highlighted in yellow. I asked my assistant here to refine those portions of the minutes in order to validate the exacts of the claims, the exact words in there. I have the minutes here currently, if the council would like to review them. I went through today and timestamped everything. If you'd like me to play anything so you can contest it, or the council can hear it or anything, I'd be happy to play it. Hopefully in the interest of time, I earmarked everything, so it could be done relatively quickly if anybody would like to hear portions of it.
So I'm not tracking the answer. So are the EDA minutes in the packet that went to the council different from the actual EDA minutes as approved by the EDA?
These were not intended.
I don't care about intentions. My question is, are they different?
Yes.
Intentions will be a different question.
Yes, they are different.
They are different. Okay, why aren't we filing the correct stuff with the council? Now we're into intention. What is the intention of changing that?
Are you asking me a question?
Yeah, I am.
You want to lower your voice?
No, I don't. I don't get this.
Okay.
You're accusing my client of improprieties and then you're screwing around with the minutes. Why? Is there a purpose? What's the intention? Answer that.
Are you calm now?
No.
Wait till you're.
I might even not even be mad. Could be an act, you know.
You're good at it.
I am good at it.
Okay,
Why?
so moving on. I shared these minutes with Mr. Gross because of the fact that I needed to substantiate the exact same things that were stated by Mr. Solomon. I asked the assistant to go through and make sure, and at no time have I stated that these minutes are the new minutes for the EDA board. At no time was it stated that these were changed. The minutes on record with the City of Tracy are the minutes that were approved by the EDA board, which I believe is where Tony Peterson may have got them, as you stated earlier. This was clearly to substantiate the things that Jeff Solomon said for this situation. And again, I would be more than happy to play the actual content, and I believe that you'll avoid that because you know I'm right.
No, I don't think you're right. The question is, it's not clearly disclosed in the packet sent to the council that these are not the actual EDA minutes. What should have been done is said, here's the actual EDA minutes. Here's what I think might be a discrepancy when you listen to the tape recordings. I would have been fine with that. But that's not what's in the packet at all. I read this stuff. I understood they're the actual EDA minutes because that's the representation in the packet sent to the council. That's my only point.
Mr. Ambu, are the EDA minutes as approved by the EDA forwarded to the city council for the city council meetings?
They're approved by the EDA board directly.
And then are they submitted to the city council?
Through the packets they receive them, they're able to get them Jeff sends it out to the council.
For each city council meeting?
It depends on where the EDA meetings fall. For instance, the minutes were not approved this morning, they were tabled for next time, so they won't see the minutes until upcoming.
And your intention was just to condense them in relation to what was being presented in the written notice of removal charges?
Correct, it was just to do that portion of it.
Nothing further.
Oh, nothing further.
Isn't it common practice to paraphrase minutes and not write out every word for word from the recording?
Excuse me, Mayor, but this was before you were acting mayor. It was actually recommended by the league or by a representative of the league, basically, you guys are typing way too much, you need to condense this down. And as I talked with Mr. Gross, if we're gonna put something in, it needed to be exactly word for word what was said, not the condensed version. And that's why it was put in there, and that's also why it was highlighted in here.
Thank you.
Any further witnesses or testimony, Mr. Strupp?
Nothing.
Any other further questions by the council members? Honorable Mayor, then I would advise the council to close the hearing and then move to a discussion.
Matt, you gonna allow closing
Oh,
arguments?
my apologies, yes. Close the hearing or at least allow argument at this time. Would you prefer to go first or second, Mr. Strupp?
I'll go first.
Okay.
It's okay with you, Matt, I'm gonna hand out so the council can see, because they've had the privilege of your documents, the affidavit signed by Mr. Seeger today.
That's included as an exhibit.
Right, but I don't know if the council's gonna be able to look through everything. And then the other thing are the memos that were sent to Mr. Gross on our interpretation of Fair Credit Reporting Act and on the open meeting law.
Are these the same ones that we got in the email?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So I will make this short, because the council's been more than patient. So we submitted tonight an affidavit of Mr. Seeger verifying that there was no meeting of a quorum of people at Solomon Motors. That's Exhibit 14. Exhibit 15 is the application for credit, which I believe authorizes the EDA to run a credit background, or in the alternative, if a credit report's being provided by the applicant, to verify any information thereon. In this case, there was a credit report provided by the applicant. So the EDA had full authority to verify. And what was run was a background report, which is not a credit report. However, I will tell you, most banks will run both. So you can cross-index to verify. And so our position is the EDA had full authority to run a background report to verify the credit report that the applicant submitted. That's what Exhibit 15 allows. That would be standard, nothing out of the ordinary. Now, the fact the EDA has not been doing that, I would suggest, is a failure of EDA policies, but certainly authorized by the EDA application, signed by both Mr. Mattson and Mrs. Mattson. And if you'll note, the background report is an individual name, the application signed in their individual name, they match. The other issue with fair credit reporting is it's about consumer rights. This is a business transaction. EDA to Mattson for a business. There are all sorts of reasons why the Fair Credit Reporting Act does not even apply. And Mr. Gross provided a big printout of the statute And then I'll tell you, there's a bunch of regulations issued in the Code of Federal Regulations that go on for pages and pages. And then there's a bunch of lawsuits construing this. It's far beyond us tonight to get into all that, but our position is the Fair Credit Reporting Act does not apply, does not even remotely apply. But even more importantly, back to the application. You sign an application, you give rights to the lender to do a verification. And that's what was done. Nothing wrong with it at all. Now, I'm a little bit amazed, quite frankly. We start with a handwritten complaint that basically says he doesn't like Mr. Solomon, Mr. Peterson, and from there we get to some very detailed allegations, and I'm wondering who's complaining here? Mr. Mattson or your city administrator? I just wonder. Now, Exhibit 16 is a memo on the open meeting law violation, and with all due respect to Mr. Gross, what was done on the limited meetings, first Mr. Foltz coming to see Mr. Solomon, and then the second meeting, which is Mr. Solomon visiting with Mr. Moran. 2 meetings. Doesn't even get in the vicinity of violation of the open meeting law. Not even close. The law is clear on that. And the reasoning by the Minnesota Supreme Court is very clear. If we get into this where city council members can't talk to each other, or school board members can't talk to each other, how do you get anything done? Informal discussions are totally appropriate, provided you don't get to a quorum and actually sit there as a quorum and make some hard and fast decisions. The testimony here is you're not in a quorum, nor are any decisions made. Concerns were expressed. Perfectly appropriate, perfectly legal. Exhibit 17 is a memo on the Fair Credit Reporting Act, again explaining why it doesn't apply, and especially at the time we talk about it, but I had not seen the application. Now that I've seen the application, Exhibit 15, it's waived, it's authorized, it's allowed, nothing inappropriate at all. I'd like the council to take into account, even though Mr. Moran isn't here, his statement to the council Monday, which I thought was clear and eloquent, which verified everything Mr. Solomon and the other witnesses said today. This is an allegation, in essence, brought by the city against Mr. Solomon. The burden of proof is on the city. The city needs to find by substantial evidence that there is wrongdoing. This is not a 50-50 and you get to 51%, boom, The burden is on the city. City needs to show substantial evidence. That's by statute. That's Minnesota law. Mr. Gross is entirely correct in his memo outlining law and procedures on that issue. So, we don't have the complaining party here. We don't have Mr. Foltz here. I asked for them to be here. I don't have subpoena power. Couldn't force them to be here. Otherwise, by God, I'd bring them in and question them, but I can't do that. But when they don't show up, what do we have? We don't have diddly. We certainly don't have substantial evidence because the complaining parties don't show up. Now, there's a lot of argument that this disclaimer language in the background report, they put it there, of course, for liability reasons. That's what they do. Now, is it really binding? Is it really mandate you can't use it? Not so clear. That's a fairly complex question under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Moreover, the testimony here today is the report was not determinative. There were concerns about Mr. Mattson. There remain concerns about Mr. Mattson. Those concerns are the reasonable discretion of business people on the EDA. That's why you have business people on the EDA to use their experience and their knowledge to make reasoned decisions. Perfectly appropriate. That's what they're supposed to do. And apparently because the city administrator doesn't like the decision, off to the races we go. Who's acting in the best interest of the city, I ask? So, we're down to 3 main complaints. Despite all the detail, there are 3 issues. Open meeting violation. does not exist, not even in the vicinity of an open meeting violation, not at all. We have the claim Fair Credit Reporting Act violation. No, not at all. It's not a consumer transaction, not a violation. But most importantly, we have an application saying verify, verify. I'm reminded of President Reagan's statement, trust but verify. That's what bankers do. You verify. Why EDA wasn't doing it all the time is beyond me, but I suggest they should change their policy and do it. And the fact they did it here is perfectly appropriate and allowed. Lastly, we have this vague, bizarre, I'm going to say, allegation of conflict of interest. The question in analyzing conflict of interest is whether Mr. Solomon has an improper interest in the transaction to gain personal benefit as opposed to looking out for the interests of the city. What, pray tell, personal benefit did he have in this transaction when all he got was grief from a complaint and going through this process? The fact he has a personal business transaction that leads him to problems and questions with Mr. Matson, it's not a conflict of interest. It's appropriate personal information that can be used in a judgment to make a decision in the best interest of the city. Remember, Mr. Solomon's not the only one who had concerns with Mr. Matson. It appears the whole board, other than Mr. Foltz, had concerns, and that's why no action has been taken. Now, the fact that city people might not like that decision does not lead to wrongdoing and should not have led to allegations of wrongdoing against Mr. Solomon. This whole conflict of interest schematic that's been set up by the city of Tracy is not consistent with the law and, quite frankly, is problematic in the extreme, because I will tell you, everybody in the city council has a conflict of interest because you all have personal knowledge. And if some idiot problem attorney like me shows up and starts creating problems for you on that, you're going to regret it. You should rethink that policy. But the answer is there's no conflict of interest. Nothing done wrong here at all. No harm to the city. Looking out for the best interests of the city. Jeff should stay on the board.
Thank you. Mr. Gross?
Honorable Mayor, Council, there are disagreements in Mr. Strupp's and my interpretation of some of the applicable laws and codes, but I think it's important for the council to remind themselves and consider that this hearing is for Mr. Solomon and the allegations contained in the notice written charges for removal. This is your guiding map, okay? And the documents that were attached to that written charge for removal, those are to be taken in consideration along with the oral testimony here today, along with the other written documentation in your determination on whether each and every one of the 10 charges or allegations contained in that written charge for removal have been proven beyond substantial evidence. Now that's for the council to make that determination. The council is the fact finder. You heard the evidence, now you apply that evidence to the law, to the applicable city codes, federal statutes, case law. We'll start off with number one, the open meeting law. I disagree with Mr. Stroop. When you look at 1A, there is a holding from that case. He is correct that councils need to discuss matters outside the quorum of a meeting. However, the Minnesota Supreme Court says you can't do that serially. You can't talk to one another outside the council to discuss matters, form an agreement, discuss how you're going to vote, and then show up and pursue that way. Serial. What is serial? More than one. Okay? And what does a serial meeting consist of? A meeting with one or more members at one or more times. What's the evidence we have in front of us? Undisputed. Mr. Solomon met with Tom Moran at his residence, discussed how they're going to vote, the loan to Mr. Matson. They were at his shop. Mr. Foltz came in. He did come in. He didn't initiate that. But they did discuss Mr. Matson and the loan. There was nothing forcing Mr. Solomon to discuss that. That came up. He gave him his opinion. 3, you have an email from Mr. Salmon to Mark Seeger himself, in which he disclosed the background report and specifically pointed out aspects that he reviewed that he thought Mr. Seeger should be aware of. 1, 2, 3. Serial, more than one time, more than one member. And that's not necessarily a violation, but the violation is attempting to form an agreement or form a vote or a coalition with someone else so that when you do go to a meeting, that's in place. Open meeting violation law is to prevent that. Have matters discussed in public. When you do that serially, that's a violation. That's what Moberg says. It's listed in 1A of your packet. That's what you need to consider. Was there more than one meeting, and did it happen one or more times with one or more council members? And were they discussing the proposed loan and how to vote? You heard testimony on that. Number 2, violation of the committee member codes of conduct. Mr. Salmon signed the code of conduct as his position as a board member on the EDA. He agreed to follow those codes of conduct in his capacity as a board member for the EDA. Did he live up to that? Well, base your decisions regarding what's best for the city interests and not on personal interests and personal feelings. There was quite a bit of testimony from Mr. Salmon that he had prior dealings with Mr. Metzen. He was unhappy with that. You have to weigh the evidence and determine, could he be free from that dealing he had with Mr. Mattson in making his determination in discussing or potentially voting or terms or bringing that matter to vote on that loan, on that application, on that sale to Mr. Mattson. Was that decision to discuss, forward the background check, and use his own personal feelings in the best interest of the city? Jeff Carpenter said it was a great deal, only applicant we had. Chris Ambuel, it was, in his opinion, in the best interest of the city. You have to consider that in your decision on that charge. Was there a conflict of interest? It's not only a direct financial interest, but it's other personal consideration that impairs your independence of judgment. City Code 2.30. You should be well aware of that. Now you have to weigh Mr. Salmon's testimony. Did this dispute with Mr. Mattson impair his independence of judgment? That is the question you need to determine. He was quite unhappy with that. That's for you to determine, did it rise to the level that impaired his independence of judgment in discussing, deciding, and potentially considering this proposed sale and loan. The violation of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. You have that in your packet, exhibit number 8. The application itself was signed by James Mattson. This is a personal loan. There was no unique wraps and advertising, signed by James Mattson and his wife. That is what's signed on the application. Now you have to consider, what is a consumer report? The language in the statute is very clear, and it reads, a consumer report means any written, oral, or other communication of any information by a consumer reporting agency bearing on a consumer's creditworthiness, credit standing, credit capacity, character, reputation, personal characteristics, made for the purposes of determining whether someone is applicable or should be granted a loan. Then you have to go into the definition of what's a credit reporting agency. Consumer reporting agency means any person, which is defined as a corporation, trust, estate, cooperative, which for fee, and there's testimony that this was purchased, engages in whole or part in the practice of assembling or evaluating consumer credit information or other information on consumers for the purpose of furnishing consumer reports to third parties. Well, this Truth Finder, what did they do? They gathered information on Mr. Mattson. They were paid a fee. They're a consumer report agency pursuant to the definition of the code. Then you have to look at adverse action. How is that defined? It means an action taken or determination that is, one, made in connection with an application that was made by or a transaction that was initiated by a consumer in connection with a review and account, and adverse to the interests of the consumer. So we have an application by Mr. Mattson. He filled it out. He submitted it to the EDA for consideration of a loan. Yes. Now, adverse action. There was discussion that they discussed a vote, They were going to discuss purchase agreement terms, and then all of a sudden it fell apart. And now it's tabled, there's no further discussion. You have to make that determination is that adverse action? There was discussion in this deal, it was going forward, all of a sudden it fell apart, now there's nothing. Was there adverse action pursuant to the definition? Then you get into the issue of, is this an accredited consumer report? It's not. There is a disclaimer on the second page. Do not use this for credit or consumer loan purposes. Clearly stated. It's not accredited. You cannot use it for credit loan decisions. Was Mr. Mattson advised that this was obtained? No, he wasn't. Was notice provided to him that it was provided? No, he wasn't. Mr. Salmon disseminated it. It's an unaccredited report. That's not allowable under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Then we delve into City Code 2.30. That's a broad statute, but it basically states you can't violate any law. And that encapsulates the Fair Credit Law, the Open Meeting Law, the Committee Codes of Conduct, and then the Tracy City Code. Additionally, allegation number 5, 2.30 again, subdivision 3. Did Mr. Salmon fail to adhere to the rules of work performance established by his position as an EDA board member? Did he comply with the code of conduct? Lastly, did he breach any of those other laws, city code, or open meeting laws? Those are somewhat duplicative, but they are violations that have been brought based upon the evidence. You've heard that, you need to make that decision. And then finally, again, with the conflict of interest. When you look at that other personal interest that impairs your independence of judgment, did Mr. Salmon's prior dealings with Mr. Mattson affect his ability to have a clear mind in deciding whether to loan money, to consider it, to vote it clearly with Mr. Mattson? And if he did, then why did he forward the report on to Mr. Seeger? That's for you to decide. Mr. Stroop had made some comments about lawsuits and the applicability of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. When you look at the packet, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission basically says if it meets the definition of a consumer reporting agency and consumer report, it is. What is that? It's information compiled for a fee on determination of a person's creditworthiness for a loan, credit, and such. That's what happened here. It was obtained for that purpose. It was unaccredited. You can't forward that. You can't disclose that. You can't use that. Now, when you look at that verification that Mr. Mattson signed, it says he verifies that information be acquired. This is an unaccredited consumer report. That doesn't apply to unaccredited consumer reports. That's against the Fair Credit Reporting Act. You need to take into consideration all that information and make that decision on whether there's substantial evidence on each and every one of those allegations contained in the notice of written charges for removal. That's your task, and you need to weigh that. It's an important decision, as it could or could not cause Mr. Salmon's removal from the EDA board member. So that's what you're tasked with. Consider all that evidence, weigh the conflicts of testimony, and arrive at your decision.
Okay. Is there anything further? We will now close the public hearing. Council will deliberate each one of the accusations.
Yeah, that's public as well, correct, Mr. Gross?
Correct.
So I guess we will,
Take just a couple minutes.
Sure.
to read through a couple of the things we just received, like from
Yes.
Cedar and stuff like that. And I'll read fast.